Hey guys, what's up? This is Kenton Hornbeck, co-host of the BeckDeck podcast. Welcome back to episode 2. I'm joined alongside my co-host, Logan Decker. Logan, how are we doing this week, man?
Doing great, man. It's been a good week. Yesterday, did a Christmas party with wifey's work, and that was fun, getting the holiday spirit. But I'm excited to talk about some football as we're getting to the playoff crunch and, fantasy football. If you're into that, it's playoff time.
Yeah, we're getting really into the later part of the season here. We have some teams that are on the verge of making the playoffs. Of course, my team, we're talking fantasy, by the way, not the NFL standings. My team, horrible. We're kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum, but we'll get into that later. Anyway, Logan, what are we talking about this week, man?
Yeah, so last week we kind of did a dive in a little bit of the history, in terms of the quarterbacks and interesting personalities. And I figured because of the timing, we're kind of at the, we have a quarter mark of the NFL season basically left. So let's talk about some guys and some teams that have really came up on the scene, potentially out of nowhere or just have been big parts of fantasy, big parts of the NFL season that you have to talk about in terms of how they've helped their team and potentially how they've hurt their team.
Yeah, we're going to have some busts coming up after the booms. So the way we divided this, Logan has selected 3 fantasy players who he's deemed to be a big boom for this season, people who've really contributed to their teams, as he said earlier. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we're going to select 3 busts apiece and talk about why they've been disappointments, haven't performed to expectations. That's going to be really interesting. And then after that, we're going to kind of give an overview of our fantasy teams and our fantasy league. That's going to be really fun. So, Logan, I know you've put a lot of effort into this list. Let's go ahead and take a look at your number 1 here.
So I must preface this by saying I am not a huge fan of America's team, but my wife is and my father-in-law is, so I see more Cowboys football than I would like. But I got to give kudos to running back Javonte Williams, 25-year-old coming out of the University of North Carolina. He had started his career with Denver, as we all know, and he showed a lot of promise early on. In his second year, he had torn his ACL, and he just didn't look the same after that. He struggled this couple years after trying to come back from the injury, lost his explosiveness. He's really known for being a bruiser, breaking a lot of tackles. I remember the one run in particular against the Ravens in his rookie season where he dragged like 3 guys for 20 yards. It's a phenomenal run. It showed a lot of promise for him. So he gets the nod basically in preseason. He's in the fighting for the position battle for the Dallas Cowboys, who have struggled really to have a running back, in this past year, having a guy step up because Zeke has kind of aged out, and they decide to let one of their other running backs, who is for the Tennessee Titans, they let him walk there with not Rico Dowdle. That's who's doing good stuff in Carolina. Tony Pollard. Anyway, diving directly into the stats here. So currently, I'll preface this. I did this research before the Thursday night game. So these numbers have changed a little bit, but heading into Thursday night, he's 6th in total rushing yards in the NFL with 955. So he's really close to the 1,000-yard mark. He's 7th in rushing touchdowns with 8. He's 12th in rushing yards per attempt with 4.8, which is phenomenal because the way I look at the yards attempt, if you can get around 4, that's pretty solid. If you can get to 5, you're having a pretty good season. Anything above 5 is incredible. He's 6th in rushing attempts, so he's getting the rock. He has won this backfield pretty handedly. And in terms of franchise record, he's, as of right now, before Thursday night, he's the 40th highest in rushing total in Cowboys history in just 12 games. So that number's going to go up. He's 23rd all-time in yards a game for the franchise. So let's just say coming in Thursday, he was averaging about 79 yards a game. And if he just kept that consistently, he would finish with 1,353 yards, which would be the 13th highest in franchise history for the Cowboys. And you're like, well, that doesn't sound so high. I'm like, well, when you're dealing with Emmitt Smith, DeMarco Murray, Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard, those are some pretty big runners there in terms of their history. So it's like, okay, I like to pull out individual stats. So week 1 was against Philadelphia. I think if we all look back, we will remember that as the Jalen Carter spitting on Dak Prescott game. He had 15 carries for 54 yards and 2 touchdowns. So it was kind of a glimmer. Like, oh, yeah, Javonte Williams, he looks pretty solid. This is a tough rush defense from Philadelphia coming into the year. The following week, 18 carries, 97 yards, 1 touchdown, 6 catches for 33 yards. A little bit more versatile use. Looks like he's the guy in Dallas. Week 5, New York Jets, 16 carries, 135 yards, 1 touchdown. That's his most explosive game this year in terms of rushing yards with the total. And then week 8 against Denver, who is arguably one of, if not the best, defenses of the NFL this year. 13 carries for 41 yards. But I like to highlight the 2 touchdowns. The reason why is he is the goal line back. He has been really settled in as a 3-down back. And you can see that in terms of the rushing attempts and how many times he touches the ball this year. So kind of looking at the team as a whole, the Cowboys' rushing offense is ranked 14th overall. They are first in passing attack. And when I say 14th overall, I'm talking purely on rushing yards, not talking touchdowns. And then looking at the previous season, when I kind of mentioned Rico Dowdle, this is when they signed Dalvin Cook. They're riding the corpse of Ezekiel Elliott at this point. They didn't have a single pass rusher go over 1,000 yards. And the last time they had a 1,000-yard rusher was the year prior with Tony Pollard before he went to the Tennessee Titans. During that year, last year, they were 27th in the league in the rushing attack. And I also like to point out, the year before they were 14th in the rushing attack. So they kind of gotten back to this baseline here. So they have, and 2 years ago, Tony Pollard, they had a very, very solid back with him. And now they bring in Javonte Williams, who is on that same line. But what's interesting is last year, 24, when that rushing attack was very weak, Dallas, who's known for being a little bit more pass-heavy offense, this year they're first. Last year they were 11th. And then 2 years ago, 23, when they had Pollard, another 1,000-yard rusher, they were back to third in passing attack. So this is a team that, yes, they are more pass first, but they need the rushing attack to at least be solid to really open it up to take advantage of how their offense is built. So he's been having a phenomenal year, but it's not just him. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot on this guy because I got a feeling, we had discussed the list prior, that you had picked this guy. But George Pickens has been a phenomenal help for them in terms of opening up the field. Dak has been having a phenomenal season. I know he gets a lot of hate because he plays for the Cowboys and he makes mistakes sometimes during the crunch time, and that really emphasizes some of the hate that he gets. But as of right now, he's second in passing in the league, only behind Drake Maye. He's second in touchdowns, and he has the 8th best passer rating in the league. In terms of their defense, overall this year they have not been great. In terms of points allowed, I believe they are the worst in the league, if not 31st. And of course, this offseason, a lot of the talk was Micah Parsons and the trade. And you can go back and forth on whether it was a good trade or not. He's a phenomenal player. He is. He's an all-pro. If he keeps on with his trajectory and stays healthy, it wouldn't surprise me if he's a Hall of Famer. They get 2 first-round draft picks, 26, 27. They get a 3-time Pro Bowler in Kenny Clark. First 9 seasons with the Packers. So I could say maybe not in his prime anymore, but he's still a very, very solid player. But what I want to note with Micah Parsons is the contract extension that he got from the Packers. 4-year, $188 million. That is insane. He broke the market in terms of defensive ends, and it seems like every year, Myles Garrett broke the market earlier, and then Micah Parsons' contract just, I felt like blew it out of the water. $44 million in signing bonus, $62 million paid in the first year, $120 million of it is guaranteed at signing, $141 through the first 3 years. That's an insane contract. So once they made this trade, rightfully so, people are mad at the Cowboys and Jerry Jones for he needs to sign players earlier, that way he can save money, because every year those players in those positions are going to see higher and higher records depending on what's happening in the league. I will give him credit, though. He made a trade before the deadline, acquiring Quinnen Williams from the Jets, who is also a phenomenal. He's a 3-time Pro Bowler, 27 years old. They gave the Jets second-round pick next year's draft, and then 27 first-round pick, and a defensive tackle, Mozzie Smith, out of Michigan, who I really liked coming in, but he just hasn't been productive. The one note I want to make with this trade, so before the Detroit game, and honestly, their rushing defense wasn't awful in that game. You're just facing a phenomenal duo and running backs. So the Cowboys were giving up 143 yards a game, which is 28th in the league. After the trade to get Quinnen Williams, they only give up 45 yards a game. That is first in the league. And the opponents I like to highlight, and before the season, you'd be like, wow, that's a pretty good setup. But they faced Las Vegas, they faced Philadelphia, and they faced Kansas City. And as we all know, if you pay attention to the NFL, these three teams have had a struggling, if not non-existent, run game. But I do like to highlight that out because he has been playing phenomenal, and him and the combination of Kenny Clark, they're adding, Jadeveon Clowney, brought in Dante Fowler, drafted Donovan. I'm going to mispronounce his name, but Izuraraku. He's an edge from Boston College. And then in terms of the offense, they added in Tyler Booker, who was a first round, 12th overall pick from Alabama, who's been a starting guard for him. Been phenomenal. So Dallas has made some moves this year in terms of the whole team that has seen them make a jump. And as of right now, coming into the Detroit game, I'm like, wow, they actually have a lot of momentum behind them. They lose Detroit. I think the only way that they can get in the playoffs now is that Philadelphia just collapses at this point. Because the wild card, between the NFC West with Seattle and the 49ers, it's a bloodbath trying to get in, because you're going to have so many good teams again who are going to have great records but just can't win the division. So even though Dallas has gotten a lot of hate this year, I think that the acquisitions that made with various players, including Javonte Williams, who has been phenomenal this year, kind of came out of nowhere, and it's good to see him healthy again, and I'm excited to see what he does the rest of the year in terms of season stats and seeing if he can make the Cowboys get a push and potentially sneak in to the playoffs.
Yeah, and one thing I want to bring up about Dallas is that the whole franchise is kind of the island of hyper-athletic misfit toys. Jerry Jones was famously the guy who gave Greg Hardy a second chance. So anytime Jerry Jones can find these really talented, maybe guys who didn't live up to expectations earlier in their career, such as Javonte Williams, Jerry Jones will buy them for the cheap, give them a role within the defense or the offense, and see if they could live back up to the billing they once had as young players. Javonte Williams fits that perfectly. Obviously, he wasn't really an attitude problem, but coming out of North Carolina, he was viewed as somebody who could really, take control within Denver's offense. And it never really materialized, as you were saying earlier. He was kind of banged up. He didn't really have as many good games as people would have liked. I don't believe he had over 1,000 yards in a season. This year with Dallas, he does, and he's been handling the rock really well. So we got to give Javonte a lot of credit, especially because in the past, Dallas was always viewed as a team with a poor rushing attack. And he's kind of changed that narrative. But coming into this season, nobody was really expecting Dallas to have much of a rushing game at all. And Javonte has really elevated their offense because he's been able to tote the rock so well. So shout out to Javonte Williams. And that was a really good pick in our league. And people who targeted him before the draft maybe knew something that a lot of us didn't. I know a lot of Cowboys fans may have been low-key pretty excited. They probably weren't running to the hills and, screaming from the top, yes, we have Javonte Williams, but he was definitely a guy who they knew could produce if he could stay healthy. Something I want to talk about also, moving on to my player next, is George Pickens. So as Logan kind of described in the Javonte Williams section, was Dallas's kind of outlook on the season and how they've been performing so far. And George Pickens has been a really large part of Dallas's offense and resurgence in the passing game. So Dallas traditionally has CeeDee Lamb at their number one wide receiver spot. He's really talented. We obviously know how good CeeDee Lamb is. And going out into the offseason, Jerry Jones was able to pick up George Pickens, who was in Pittsburgh the past couple of years. Pittsburgh, they got Aaron Rodgers. They traded for DK Metcalf. So once that became apparent, George Pickens was kind of out of the fold in Pittsburgh. Naturally, Jerry Jones is like, this is a perfect guy I could take a flyer on. George Pickens is honestly like the perfect Dallas Cowboy, and the Island of Misfit Toys reference I made earlier, I feel like that's just so George Pickens. He had a lot of attitude problems coming out of Georgia. We all remember a bunch of sideline flare-ups there in Pittsburgh, but we also saw a lot of promise. I remember the first George Pickens highlight I saw in the NFL was from that preseason game. It may have been like the third preseason game of the year, his rookie year. Maybe it was his sophomore year. I can't exactly remember. It's a big one-hand catch kind of fading into the back of the end zone, and from that point on, we were like, oh, this guy has some serious talent. Unfortunately for George, he was never quite able to put it all together in Pittsburgh. Now, you could attribute that to a few things. One, Pittsburgh is not exactly known as a franchise who has great offense. They really struggle on offense, and it's kind of a meme where they're 9-8 at the end of the year, and the defense has kind of carried them across the finish line. But they do historically draft pretty good wide receivers. It's just the quarterback play post-Ben Roethlisberger has not been able to match up with the defensive talent. And Mike Tomlin obviously is known as the defensive coach. So not to go too far into the Steelers, but I'm kind of setting the table for why didn't George Pickens work out in Pittsburgh? Well, it was a combination of his attitude, poor quarterback play, and really, a little bit of laziness. He wasn't exactly hyper aware of the playbook. He was still learning how to run routes crisply. All of that kind of culminated in George Pickens being on the outs in Pittsburgh when Aaron Rodgers signed there. They got DK Metcalf. I think that was a message to him like, hey, it's time to move on. Jerry Jones picks him up, and he's having the best season of his career with the Dallas Cowboys. I think it's easy to say that Dak Prescott is the best quarterback that George Pickens has ever played for. And say what you want about Dak Prescott, but he commands the room in Dallas. He is undoubtedly their franchise quarterback. Jerry Jones is committed to him time and time and again. And Dak Prescott, arguably one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the league. He can definitely throw the ball. And when you get him a guy like George Pickens, opposite of Jake Ferguson and CeeDee Lamb, they're going to make some sparks happen. Put Javonte Williams into the running game too, then you're really going to see a fully fleshed out offense where they're able to spread it out and move the ball. So I'm looking at George Pickens' career year this year. One of the best games he had was against Green Bay. Obviously, Green Bay, Dallas, big rivalry game. That was in week 4. He had 8 catches for 2 touchdowns and 134 yards. And I felt like the conversation around George Pickens weeks prior to that in 2 and 3 were picking up a little bit. He had 68 yards in both of those games against the Giants and the Bears, 2 touchdowns. So we started to see little flares like, oh, hey, George Pickens is, doing something here. Then that Green Bay game, he pops off. A couple weeks later, he has 168 yards against Carolina. He has a touchdown. So once you combine that all together, so weeks 2 through 6, George Pickens was going on a run. He was going on a run. The next couple weeks, he didn't score any touchdowns, but he had near 100 yards, so he's still involved in the offense. Obviously, they had their bye week, and he's still been producing for them going late into the season. Now, he did have that little sideline flare-up. He was on social media last game against Detroit, trying to silence the critics who called him uninterested. Famously, Richard Sherman went out of his way to criticize George Pickens on, I believe, his Amazon show. So that's just kind of part of the George Pickens experience that we've come to know. He's going to have some attitude problems. He's going to have a little bit of trouble, but ultimately if he keeps his head on his shoulders, he's a guy who can produce and really help the Cowboys and fantasy owners this season. Last game, it was a little pedestrian against the Lions. He had 5 catches, 37 yards. It wasn't great, but he was still out there involved in the offense. So going toward the end of the year, I would say he has some favorable matchups. He's playing Washington, the Giants, Minnesota over the next couple of weeks. Not in that order, but he's got some favorable matchups. I'm curious to see how the Cowboys continue to try to get him the ball, even in the wake of the blow up against Detroit. I don't want to make too much out of it. Obviously, football players and analysts, they kind of feud constantly. It's just part of the NFL media. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on George Pickens and how he's done so far this season.
No, George Pickens has had a phenomenal season. I agree. I think this is a career year for him. He started off a little slow, and I think part of that is, new offense, getting into the system. CD Lamb's still the main guy. CD gets hurt. And I think that's when it really started to open up, where George Pickens was, in terms of talent, and I don't mean this to any disregard to Dunbar or Malik Davis or any of the other guys on there, but once Lamb was hurt, he was just demanding the targets. And he's a great route runner. He's a phenomenal athlete. He has great hands. The only downside, like you mentioned, is his on-the-field attitude part of it. And to be honest with you, I think this is the best year that he's had in terms of, people talking about, I remember with Pittsburgh, it's like, every other week I feel like he's getting in a fight or he's doing stuff on the field. I've only had the one incident, or I've only heard of the one incident with him this year. And it was probably the most relatively tame in his entire playing career. I think that I agree, he's in the best system he's ever been in, just because Pittsburgh's offense has always been, and this is kind of AFC North in general, it's just a little bit slower, ground and pound, weather gets colder. It's a little bit more, I don't want to say physical because I don't want to sound like the NFC East is not physical division, because it is. It's a different tempo of football. And the head coaches, offensive coordinators in the AFC North are all kind of in line with that, especially when it gets colder out. George Pickens has been phenomenal. He really, really has. I'm very curious to see how he finishes on the year. I think he'll continue to stride strong. Those matchups that you mentioned, very cushy defenses. He should be able to get his stats for sure. And I believe that when, they made the trade with Pittsburgh, is this his last year on his contract? Or does he have one more year?
I don't know off the top of my head.
I want to say, and I apologize if I'm wrong on this, but I want to say he's either got a year or 2 left. Like, this is kind of a prove-it year. And he's done incredible. I think you could make the argument, is he a 1A, is he a 1B? Regardless, he's going to get paid by somebody next year. And I would be, quite frankly, surprised if the Cowboys found a way to pay him just because of what they're paying CeeDee Lamb, what they're paying Dak. They bring in, I'm not saying, I don't know their contracts off the top of my head, but I know Kenny Clark is probably making decent money. I know that Quentin Williams is probably making some good money. He's got his second contract from the Jets, and they traded, when they made that trade. And who knows how they're going to, teams can find ways to move the cap around and make stuff work, but I feel like another franchise who needs a wide receiver might jump in, especially with some teams coming up next year. I know there are a lot of teams that have a lot of cap, like 100 mil plus coming up. So I'm very curious to see how the season ends for him and what it looks like in the offseason, because I think he could be one of the hottest players, if not the player on the market coming into this offseason or next offseason, whenever his contract is up.
Yeah, and I'd like to, add to your point. Pickens to me feels like a really high-end 1B. He kind of feels like a T. Higgins. I'm a little more bearish on T. Higgins than a lot of other people. I personally think Cincinnati should have traded him before they had to pay him. I thought they could have used the draft capital they accumulated in a potential trade to help rebuild their defense or find another lineman, free up some cap space. But besides that, I think George Pickens kind of feels like to me in that similar vein of a really high-end 1B. Definitely the talent to be the number 1A, but his attitude, I think, I don't know if you can rely on George Pickens if you're going to pay him wide receiver 1 type of money. Same thing with T. Higgins, kind of injury history, etc. Can you rely on him to be out there and be a 1A? And I think that's the question about George Pickens and his contractual situation heading into the future.
Yeah, I agree with the take with, kind of comparing him to T. Higgins. I do think he's more of a 1B. I think he's a phenomenal talent, but I think he will end up, when his contract does end, a team that will desperately need him. Whether they're going to be good or not, will give him the money. And that will be the real testament to see, hey, you have the money now. You're probably going to be the number 1 on the new team. This is going to be the kind of the crossroads for how people are going to talk about you 10 years from now. But I think as long as he keeps his head on his shoulders, I think he's going to do well. He's got all the physical tools, and you can definitely see he's improved year to year in terms of how he runs his routes, how he fights against coverage. Now you can make the arguments on, like you said recently, how much is he willing to go for the ball, the dedication for it or whatnot. It'll all even out. I have no concerns about what he's looking like, let's say 5 years down the road. I think he'll still be relevant. Now, George Pickens, phenomenal player. I want to move on to my next pick, and I realized putting this list together, I have I got a couple guys from North Carolina. He is the sophomore phenom. He's taken the NFL by storm. I think a lot of fans of this franchise were hoping for that. They were very optimistic on it, but I don't think a single person thought this type of explosion, this type of trajectory was going to happen. And it's the 23-year-old, 3rd overall pick from New England in the 24 draft, and that's Drake Maye.
Drake Maye.
Mania. But, yeah, last year's first-time Pro Bowler, kind of, squeezing in there. For the first 13 games of this year, 3,412 yards passing. He's averaging 262 yards a game. He's rushed for 319 yards, 23 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns. He only has 6 interceptions. He has a 111.9 passer rating. That's phenomenal. The league average typically year to year is around 89, 90. So the fact that he's 20 points higher is insane. Currently the team's 11-2, 1 seed in the AFC. He's 1st in passing yards. He's 4th in passing touchdowns. He's number 1 in the passer rating. He has a 71.5 completion percentage. That's 1st among NFL starting quarterbacks. The team itself, 2nd in total offense in terms of scoring. They are 2nd in passing offense. They are 12th in the rushing offense. In his pop-off games that I want to note, when he faces some questionable teams, he doesn't back down. He lets it down. So week 2 against Miami, 82% passing completion, 230 yards, 2 touchdowns, 10 rushes for 31 yards, and a touchdown. So that was kind of a early season kind of alert. Your blinkers on in your car saying he's on his way. Week 6 against New Orleans, 69% pass completions, 261 yards, 3 touchdowns, 9 rushes for 28 yards. Week 8 against Cleveland, who as a whole has not been having a great year, but their defense is phenomenal. Myles Garrett is going for the record, and I don't see any reason why he's not going to break it weeks ahead of time. 75% passing completion percentage, 282 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, 7 rushes for 50 yards. He's unstoppable. He looks phenomenal right now. Compared to last season with Mayo as head coach, 2,276 yards, 15 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, 88.1 passer rating. They were 30th in total offense, 32nd in passing offense, 13th in rushing offense. I mentioned, Mayo, Gerard Mayo, the head coach. He had Alex Van Pelt. And then, of course, those guys are let go, and they bring in Mike Vrabel, and they bring back Josh McDaniels, the Golden Boys in New England. And they hit the ground running. So what made this jump besides Drake Maye having a huge jump into his sophomore year? Well, when you draft offensive tackle, the 4th overall pick, he's probably pretty good, and that's Will Campbell out of LSU. Before the injury, and this is according to PFF, so wherever you put your stock in PFF, I do trust some of the offensive line grades. He's 19th among all tackles in the NFL in terms of pass blocking. He's 43rd in run blocking in the NFL. And yes, that's not jumping off the page numbers, but 19th, I'm like, considering it's 32 times 2, that's 64 tackles. And he's in, the top 50%, top 35% there. Of course, they add an explosive running back, Trayvon Henderson, who I think Patriots fans and fantasy players are pulling their hair out about his usage. But he's had an explosive preseason, and that's where it kind of all started. But when Ramondre went down, 14 carries, 147 yards, 2 tutties. Week 11 against the Jets, 19 carries, 62 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5 catches, 31 yards, and a touchdown. I also want to give kudos to their rookie safety, Craig Woodson, who is 106th overall. He's 5th on the team in terms of solo tackles. Getting a starting caliber safety like that late is definitely going to help your team as a whole ascend. And then, of course, this is a guy that I was a little bullish on just because of his age and his recent injury. But bringing in 4-time Pro Bowler Stephon Diggs, who suffered the ACL tear last year, he started off a little slow, but he's been ramping up. He's 19th in the league in receiving yards. He's 8th in receptions. He's got 3 touchdowns. And then I like to give kudos to the defense. They're bringing in a bunch of Tennessee guys, but just some really, really solid players. Harold Landry, Clavon Chason, Milton Williams, Robert Spillane. All of these signings, all the new ones, just these 5 that I mentioned, have a combined 18.5 sacks. Spillane is their leading tackler. Gonzalez has been relatively healthy all year. And in terms of defense, they are 5th in points allowed. So New England has had a massive jump just in terms of offensive output. And like I said, Stephon Diggs was really the only free agency add in terms of skill players. So they have this combination of, Keyshawn Butte, Kyler Williams, I believe, is the one wide receiver. I might have got that name wrong. But they've been using an assortment of guys to move the ball down the field. Hunter Henry has had a really good season. And Drake Maye just looks solid. He looks great. He's accurate. He's decisive. He runs when he needs to. He doesn't take bad hits. He's what you look like or what you look for in a franchise quarterback in a rebuild. And New England fans are ecstatic, and the rest of the league is like, oh, here we go again. It's the GTA San Andreas meme. New England's back. And, the defense adding all these additions. Then you got Mike Vrabel, who is arguably one of the best defensive minds that, I would say in the past 15 years in the league. I remember in the playoff game when it was the Titans versus the Patriots, and he was pulling stuff out of the rule book that I have never seen before, taking like delays on punts to continue the clock running to beat Bill Belichick as he's sitting there throwing his, his notebook, his pad, whatever, throwing it out, getting mad about what's going on. He's a phenomenal coach. Saying that as a Titans fan, that is one of the worst mistakes we've ever made as a franchise in the past 5-10 years, is letting that man go. And then bringing back in Josh McDaniels, who is an excellent offensive coordinator, but please, any other NFL team, do not offer him another head coaching job. Don't do it. It's not worth it. But he's a phenomenal OC, and he's a great developer of the quarterback, and I'm sure he's played a huge role in getting Drake Maye to progress. But New England, for some, I think, we're going to make a jump. Nobody expected first in the AFC. They look like a phenomenal team. Now, I will say, this is not me. I'm giving them all these kudos, is that they've had one of the easiest in terms of strength of schedules. That might come back to bite them. They look great. They look solid, but I want to see them face a extremely tough defense. I want to see them face Denver. I want to see them face Houston and see what this matchup looks like in the playoff time if Houston were to make it. Now, I think Denver's a lock. I really do, whether that's division or wild card. But I want to see them run into a top 5 defense, and I want to see how Drake Maye handles that. And I hope he does handle it well. And I don't want the Patriots to fail because I think this is a really fun team to watch. If you haven't gotten to watch them yet, do it because it is, I wouldn't say it's, even though he's first in the league, he hasn't had a 300-yard passing game this year. This is just a solid, consistent football team that moves the ball down the field, converts on opportunities, and plays solid defense. This is a quality, fundamental team that everybody needs to watch if you haven't at some point.
Yeah, you kind of previewed where I was going to go with this. So Drake Maye is a really great player, and I think in the eyes of some, I'll put a pin in what I was just about to ask you, and I'll ask it here at the end of my thing here. But yeah, let me go through the list of teams New England has played this year. Las Vegas, Miami. They played Pittsburgh, Carolina, Buffalo, New Orleans, Tennessee, Cleveland, Atlanta. They played Tampa, the Jets, Bengals, and Giants. All horrible teams for the most part with losing records, poor defenses. Atlanta, the Jets, New Orleans. So obviously I don't want to ding Drake Maye for beating the competition in front of him. That's not really what I'm trying to do with this, but I do want to point out that New England overall has played a fourth-place schedule. And so once, it remains to be seen how they're going to do in the playoffs. New England's obviously very good. I do think they're a lot better under Mike Vrabel. They are one of the best teams in the league. But I would like to put a fraud alert out on the Patriots. I just want to say that right now. I know I'm a Colts fan. I know I'm historically a Patriots hater, but I do want to put a fraud alert out on them because I do think they could get upset in the playoffs. Now, bringing it back to Drake Maye specifically, I totally agree with all your points. I think, Drake Maye is a guy who was hyped up to be a really good quarterback prospect coming into the draft. Guys like Jaden Daniels kind of took a little bit of that shine away. I think Drake Maye, before his last college season, was projected to be the number one quarterback coming out of that class, and then some guys supplanted him. Obviously, he falls to New England. New England fans, they were really excited about him. He made the Pro Bowl last year. He had a good season, and now he's improved upon last season, which guys like Jaden Daniels, even though he was hurt, did not. So Drake Maye, I think, is becoming a guy who's inserting himself or will insert himself into the best 6, 7, 8 quarterbacks in the NFL on a year-in and year-out basis. I think that's kind of where we're at with Drake Maye. At the moment, do I see Drake Maye being on the level of a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson going forward, Patrick Mahomes? I think that remains to be seen. But I do think he's going to be consistently, if he stays healthy, consistently in the mix for top quarterbacks in the league. And if you're drafting a quarterback such as New England, especially in the post-Tom Brady era where that had been up in the air, you weren't really sure what you were getting a guy like Drake Maye is perfect. Now, we all know Patriots fans, and we all know, or former Patriots fans who jumped off the bandwagon once Brady retired. Let's be completely honest here. You all loved Brady. You all loved Belichick. You like to be front runners. Where were you during the Gerard Mayo year? Where were you guys? It's like the Cubs fans when they were bad. What happened to you guys? Anyway, to bring it back, I think a lot of people in the Boston sports fan universe, I listen to a lot of Bill Simmons, guys like that. They really love Drake Maye. They love hyping him up. They're really excited about the Patriots. I'm happy for you guys. But this isn't, to me, Brady Belichick 2.0. And I don't think they actually think that, but the outcry from the fans, the amount of support they've been throwing behind him, it kind of feels like they're like, oh, here we go, Patriots again. We're so back, and you guys are in trouble. And I don't think it's going to be quite like that. I still trust the Bills more in that division, even with all of their problems. But Drake Maye is legit. He is good, and he's going to be a top 5 to 7 quarterback in the NFL for a very long time, and I think that's great for New England. It's kind of rescued their franchise. It showed that Robert Kraft can hire competent people in the post-Bill Belichick era. He knew Mike Vrabel was a good hire. Mike Vrabel, historically a very good coach. I totally agree that it was a mistake for Tennessee to get rid of Mike Vrabel. He provides a floor to that franchise that, they quite needed. Tennessee needed that floor, but I think they were like, hey, we could do better than this, and then they hired Brian Callahan. So anyway, it is what it is. But I'm excited to see how Drake Maye does. They're playing Buffalo in Week 15. Got another tough game at Baltimore. Finish out the end of the year with some cupcakes. New York, Miami. They're going to be in the playoffs. We'll see how they do in the playoffs. But New England's trajectory is headed upwards. Now, to remove the pen to what I was going to ask earlier, and I've kind of alluded to this in my rant here. Has Drake Maye surpassed Jaden Daniels for you? I know that Jaden has been hurt this year. He had that elbow injury. He's coming back this week. But to me, and a guy who drafted Jaden high in fantasy leagues, both fantasy leagues, I put a lot of stock into the Jaden Daniels experiment here in year 2 and 2 of my money leagues. It hasn't worked out. I've had to use Trevor Lawrence in both of those leagues. One has been a little bit better than obviously our league. But has Drake Maye usurped Jaden Daniels as the top quarterback prospect in this draft? And I know Caleb Williams is kind of lingering around, but I still think it's between Drake and Jaden.
That's a great question, man. I would say, in terms of rookie quarterbacks, I like the wait, in terms of the verdict, and that's not me. I'll give you an answer for sure, but I think that, especially nowadays, we are in a rush to really decide, is this guy him or not? And I feel like a lot of the pressure is the NFL franchises putting it on themselves because they'll have this phenomenal roster built up, and we're going to pay guys, and we're going to try to do the rookie quarterback contract and, write it like that because that's the best way, in theory, to have the most talent on your team. However, some of these teams get in trouble a little bit when the quarterback isn't progressing like they would like them to. I don't mean to throw another team under the bus. The Minnesota Vikings, perfect example of it. They are panicking right now because McCarthy is not who they thought he was so far. And I'm not going to pile on him because he's had several injuries coming up and he really hasn't had the time or the chances to really get better. Kind of feels like he's just been thrown in. But not to go on McCarthy there. Jaden Daniels and the Washington Commanders, I think they caught lightning in a bottle last year because this is a team, I think coming into last year, they were like top 5 oldest roster in the league. They had patched their team together, some older vets. You got Bobby Wagner. You had all these guys in. And Jaden Daniels is a physical phenom at the quarterback position and how he can run. And the offense that they ran last year, it was quick, it was efficient. He did a lot on his legs. He was accurate. And this is a team that everything just hit right for him last year. And then coming into next year, it's not like they brought in a lot of fresh faces. They retained some of the older guys, and with his style of play, unfortunately, I hate to, people, you hear this all the time with a running quarterback, but it does leave you higher chances to get hurt. And I'm not saying that Jaden Daniels is playing dumb, but I've seen, a lot of any Washington Commander game that I've seen where he's on the run, he'll take a good hit 1 or 2 times a game. Drake Maye does a better job about protecting himself, but it seems like when he has to run, it's out of necessity. Jaden Daniels' runs are pre-selected. Some of them. Not all of them, of course. But I think New England has a stronger foundation and structure than the Commanders do, and I think that's why they've been able to excel more. And it's tough because I'm not throwing Jaden Daniels on the bus, but he's been hurt all year. It hurts this, comes back, hurts another thing, comes back. And Terry McLaurin, his top weapon, has maybe played 2-3 games this year. Not been healthy at all. They don't really have a lot of depth at the receiver position. I could argue with Terry McLaurin out. You got Debo, who is not on the right side of his career. He's made some plays, but he's definitely slowed down as late. And then you have Zach Ertz, who is he's starting to be, what is he, 35, 36? He's definitely on the other side of the hill. But he's still been good. I just think New England has a better overall roster. They're younger, and they can be more cohesive for them. And I think it helps when you have the coaching staff that you do. And I'm not hating on the head coach for the Commanders there, because I do like him. And the name's slipping out of my tongue. I know he's the defensive coordinator for the Cowboys. He's the head coach for the Falcons. I have his vision on my face. I just can't think of his name.
Morris.
But he, if I had to say, like, I think Drake Maye, if I had to pick between the two, I would say, potentially, I think he has surpassed Daniels, but I think he has a much better supporting cast around him. I'm not saying Jaden Daniels is bad. I just think he went to a franchise that has not had success. I should say, when I say success, consistent success, since we've been alive. Historically, they're a great franchise, but let's just say since the 2000s, up, down, up, down, up, down. They've won a couple divisions since then. I'm not going to sit here and they haven't done anything, but I don't know, between previous management and, some of the coaching staff I could go on and on about this topic, but I'm going to close it up and say, yes, I think Drake Maye has surpassed, because I think he is in a better offensive situation. I think his team is better. I think his team asked him to do less. And I think he has better play callers.
I'm with you. I think Drake Maye has surpassed Jaden Daniels in that aspect. And really, really quickly, because we're going to move on to my next pick, I had a team anchored by Anthony Richardson. I am not comparing Anthony Richardson to Jaden Daniels. I think Jaden is much better than Anthony Richardson. I think many quarterbacks are much better than Anthony Richardson. But when you were talking about rushing and having designed rushing plays for the quarterback, to me, throwing a lot of those in your playbook is kind of a signal that you don't quite trust the guy to just get it done with his arm. And I don't think New England has any trouble trusting Drake Maye to get it done with his arm. Now, like you were saying, they don't put as much pressure on him to do as many things maybe as Washington did with Jaden Daniels in year one. They kind of caught lightning in the bottle. But I think Drake Maye is absorbing, and he's learning how to win, and he's learning how to lead. He's learning how to combat ridiculous people like Stephen A. Smith and the media. So when you combine all that, I think the recipe is just a lot more in favor of Drake Maye going forward than Jaden Daniels. But we're going to move on to my next boom, which is the old man himself, Taco Bell in his house, Davante Adams. Davante has become the preeminent touchdown merchant in the National Football League. He's a future Hall of Famer. You know him. You maybe not love him, but I really like Davante. I'm going to age Logan and I really quick. Davante Adams was a guy who was playing while we were in high school. So 2014 was when Davante Adams broke into the NFL, famously one of the greatest wide receiver drafts of all time. Mike Evans, Davante Adams, you had guys like Allen Robinson. It was really a great time to draft a wide receiver. And if you were a Green Bay Packers fan, you got one of the best wide receivers, if not the best wide receiver in your franchise's history. I'm not going to go over his Packers career. We all know the great things he did with Aaron Rodgers. We all know the amount of winning that happened there. They made multiple NFC championship games. I will say really quick on Davante before I get into the Rams side of this is I remember him at the beginning of his career as a guy who dropped a lot of passes. I feel like he was not nearly as consistent as the guy we know him as today. I remember watching some Packers games. He had some big drops, and he kind of grew into a player that could be relied upon, and he really worked his way into becoming one of the top receivers in the league. So I have to give him his flowers. Now, to me, he's a surefire Hall of Famer and he's moved on from Green Bay. He played with one of his best friends, Derek Carr, at the Raiders. He played with Aaron Rodgers at the Jets, and everybody kind of forgot about him. They were kind of like, what is this guy now? He's 32 years old coming into this season, and we knew he was with Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay, two of the best quarterback, offensive mind guys in the NFL. And all he's done is completely revive his career in a way that only an older player could. It's not like he's carrying the entire offense, but he is highly, highly productive this season. So looking at his stats here, the past 2 games, Carolina, Tampa Bay, 2 touchdowns. He's not really taken the top off in terms of 100-yard games, but he had 58 and 62 yards respectively. The thing about Davante Adams that's very interesting, and it's really, even though he's a little older in terms of like NFL years, he's still a guy that can use his athleticism to contribute positively to the offense. When you think of the Rams receiving game, the first guy you think of is Puka Nacua. So Puka, being paired with Davante Adams, has essentially elongated the useful runway for Davante Adams in fantasy and the Rams in general, because Puka is able to absorb a lot of those targets. You don't have to go to Davante Adams every play when you have a dude like Puka, who to me reminds me of like Wes Welker, one of those kind of dudes. Hey, let's short yardage passing, attempts. Let's move the chains. He's really, really efficient in that way. So Davante Adams, being opposite of him, doesn't have to do as much work. He can really focus on getting open on big plays or, posting up in the end zone, muscling guys out because he's got that 32-year-old man body. He can really box people out. He's really, really athletic, even still for a 32-year-old. He's famously one of the best basketball players that plays in the NFL. Davante this year, 14 touchdowns receiving, leads the league, 689, receiving yards. He's had 52 receptions. And to bring my point around to the Puka thing, Puka has a top 5 receptions year this year. He has 86 total receptions. He's in the mix with guys like Trey McBride, Jamar Chase, Christian McCaffrey, Jackson Smith, and Njigba, all dudes who command a lot of targets, command a lot of receptions. So that frees up Davante to do his thing. He doesn't have 1,000 yards, but he's managed to find a way to be a highly productive fantasy wide receiver this year. And the other thing about Davante Adams is that he's been pretty healthy. As a 32-year-old, he's played in 12 games. That's really, you don't get that a lot out of older wide receivers. And the last thing I want to say about Davante Adams, which I think is really interesting, I brought up the Sean McVay thing. When you have a quarterback like Matthew Stafford, who has been around the league, I've always thought that in the beginning, maybe the first couple years of a quarterback's career, it's really a lot on the offensive coordinator and the coaching staff to give a guy, put the guy in the right situations to succeed. Tom Brady once said that once he played long enough in the league at a high level, he had seen everything. He had seen how they're going to defend him. He had seen where the linebackers are moving and where the defensive backs are shifting to. It was old hat to him. Like, yes, he still had to stay on top of the game, but he knew he essentially became a coach out there. Peyton Manning, same thing. And Matthew Stafford is at that point in his career. And I think Davante Adams also is kind of in that wide receiver version of that. He's seen every DB look. He's Davante freaking Adams. So when you get 2 really seasoned future Hall of Fame guys like Stafford and Adams together, there's going to be that understanding, and throw Sean McVay in there. There's going to be that understanding of how we can best utilize our skill sets to pick apart the defense. The Rams are once again still good. They're always good under Sean McVay, and Davante's having a really nice season. I was able to draft him in my other fantasy league, and he's really anchored the team. And, I didn't have a great draft there, but Davante Adams has provided me with a lot of fantasy production. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on DA and how he's really been able to elongate his career and productivity here in Los Angeles.
He is absolutely, without a doubt, a future Hall of Famer. He is one of the best wide receivers in our lifetimes. And we've seen a lot, between Julio, Antonio Brown, Larry Fitzgerald, let's just say going mid-2000s to now. In terms of, let's just talk career stats. He is 16th all-time in career receptions. He will probably pass Isaac Bruce and Steve Smith Jr. by the end of the year, and Andre Johnson potentially. Receiving yards, he's 26th all-time, 12,533 yards. And then in receiving touchdowns, and this is the big one, I think more people know this, because he just passed Antonio Gates last week, I believe. He is 7th all-time with 117 touchdowns. He's only 4 behind Larry Fitzgerald at 6. And to be quite frank honest, he doesn't look like he's slowing down. Is he a different player than what he was, 5 years ago? Absolutely. But and one of my favorite stories, in terms of YouTube shorts, the clips and whatnot that I've seen talking about Davante Adams, is that other players commend him for how well he does at kind of hiding the ball. Is that it is coming towards him.
That's
he
interesting.
Is well known for last possible second, he'll put his hands up, to go and make the ball. So what he does is, he can be looking up, and he does this all game. If the ball's going to the other side of the field, the ball's coming towards him, he looks up. So he tries to beat his corner, whoever's covering him, and he doesn't show that the ball's close until the last possible second. Because what do the defenders look for? Unless they're, looking straight at the quarterback and up at the ball, which you never want to do, because most of the time you are trailing Davante Adams. He has cut you up, he's pieced you up on the route, and you are following him on his fade, on his go. And he waits last second because the defenders are looking for you to put your hands up, and then that's when they'll shoot their arms up. They're trying to deflect it even though they can't see it. So he takes that away from them. To where it's so hard for them to play defense without making it an obvious penalty. And that's why he's so good on the fades and the deep routes, and why I'm pretty sure, out of all of his touchdowns, almost every single one of them are in the red zone, and the majority of them are 5 yards in, because it's, I've heard earlier this year, maybe this isn't the best comparison, but it's all right, you're at the 1 yard line, another team, let's say historic Seahawks, you give Marshawn Lynch the ball, except in the Super Bowl. With the Rams, and this year, you're at the 1 yard line, Davante Adams fade route. It's gonna hit.
Automatic.
Yeah. He's a generational player. He's the way that he plays now, I don't see any reason why he can't topple more of these records and jump up the chart. What I'm really interested to see, Jerry Rice is kind of a league in his own in terms of the touchdowns. But I would love to see him. I think he can get top 5. I think top 3 would be the ultimate goal, where he's sitting next to Jerry Rice, Randy Moss, Terrell Owens. But he has provided, in terms of not historically, this year, Puka is definitely the dink and dunk guy. He can catch it deep. He's made some phenomenal catches. But he's running the routes. He's in the motions. And Davante Adams is just like the pure X. He's like, you got to put a good corner on me, because I'll just take it. Puka's, finding the gaps in his zone, or he's trying to do some man. He's breaking through the man coverage by running certain routes, and Davante's like, you got to have a guy. They can't double either the guys, which allows them to be phenomenal and productive. And that's what we've seen all season, is that both of these guys, let's just say in fantasy-wise, I rarely recommend drafting 2 wide receivers from the same team, but if you did it this year with the Rams, you're probably pretty happy with it. Adams is just one of those guys that, no matter where he's at, he's arguably the best player on the offense side. He's great. He's phenomenal. I will always praise him. He's one of my favorite players. Like you said, we were in high school and he was still playing ball. Same age group as us. Just a phenomenal player. He's never heard anything bad about him. Keeps his head on straight. And this is a random spot. If you haven't seen the NFL receivers documentary on Netflix, he is one of the star athletes on that documentary, and he is, I would say, probably the most down to earth guy out of Justin Jefferson, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle's on there. He's a phenomenal watch, and you can tell he's just one of those guys that he puts a lot of grinding into his craft. He has come a long way. I remember the early Green Bay days. He's sitting there, Randall Cobb still on the TV, looks great. He worked his way up, and he became the trusted wide receiver for another future Hall of Famer and Aaron Rodgers. Took his talents to the Raiders, with Carr, which actually I thought was pretty decent. But, of course, they sent Carr away. He's not happy with it, so he reunites with Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. He had a decent season. It wasn't a bad season, but I think everybody in the Jets were disappointed with how that team turned out. And then he finds his new home in L.A. with another future Hall of Fame quarterback with Matthew Stafford. I know some people may go back and forth on this, but statistically he's got a Super Bowl win, and who knows what they do this year. I think if he makes a run, the Rams make a run, I think that's a lock for Stafford. I know we're talking about Adams, but I have to mention his elite passer who is pulling off something in terms of age and health that maybe Aaron Rodgers wishes he could do right now.
I totally agree about Stafford, and you brought up the Jets season. So last year he played 3 games for the Raiders and then 11 games for the Jets, and it was decent. The man still put up over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, in 2 really, really poor football situations. I mean, both of those teams were in turmoil last year. So the fact that throughout all the noise, Davante Adams was still getting after it and producing is just, the floor with Davante Adams is so, so high. And one of the things about Jerry Rice and Davante Adams is not a one-to-one comparison, but Jerry Rice was always praised for his footwork, his technical route running ability, his endurance, his stamina. He wasn't Randy Moss. He wasn't physically imposing, but if you threw the ball to Jerry Rice, he was going to catch it, and you knew where Jerry Rice was going to be. And Davante Adams is very, very much that now. Hey, guess what? If you tell Davante to go somewhere, he's going to go there. And if you throw it to him, he's going to catch it. And that's why he's remained so productive. So we got to give Davante his flowers, and this year has been a really, really big boost to his overall legacy. Because last year, he was out in no man's land. People may have forgot. They're like, Davante, he's kind of washed. And what we've learned this year is he's absolutely not washed. He's still really good. You still got to pay attention to him, and you still need to draft him in your fantasy leagues. So with that being said, Logan, who is next on your list?
This is another team that I don't like to give kudos or props to because they are the division rival of the Tennessee Titans. But this guy is a phenomenal player coming out. He had a lot of hype behind him in the draft. He's a rookie. 23-year-old, 14th overall pick from Penn State, Tyler Warren. And I remember on draft day when he's...
Sorry, Colts fan.
I was very upset that he slid that far. I don't understand why Chicago, they took a tight end before Tyler Warren. Colston Loveland, who is a great tight end. But Tyler Warren's so good, and I was very upset that Indianapolis got him because I thought in terms of talent, he's one of the best in that draft. And it's shown this year. It's definitely shown. So as of right now, in terms of the tight end position, not just, not wide receivers and tight ends, because sometimes it's a little unfair to combine those two positions. But in tight ends, he's 4th overall in receiving yards, 684. He's 11th in touchdowns. He has 4. This is in terms of receiving. I know he ran one in. And he's 5th in receptions with 58. In terms of the pacage, he's got 57 yards a game. So that would be, let's say if we average it out, I know I hate to do projections, but 969 yards. That would be 4th all-time for a rookie tight end behind Brock Bowers, Mike Ditka, Kyle Pitts. That's how good of a season he's on pace to have, and how as good of a season he's had so far. And then in terms of franchise history, let's say if he finished that pace, gets a couple more touchdowns in, that would probably be a top 5 tight end season for the Colts in franchise history. And I know I'm talking, some people like, oh, Colts? It's like, well, I know you remember Dallas Clark, the 1-year phenom with Eric Ebron, Kobe Fleener, shout out. They've had some really good tight ends. Peyton Manning has definitely, when he's had a good tight end option, he has wheeled them. And then Eric Ebron was phenomenal the 1 year. In terms of pop-off games, week 1, he already showed out against Miami. I've had Miami on a lot of pop-off games with these first 3 guys. Something tells me that their defense is not great. But week 1 against Miami, 7 catches, 76 yards. Week 4 against the Rams, one of the better defenses in the league, 5 catches, 70 yards, and 1 tush-push touchdown. Week 6 against Arizona, 6 catches, 63 yards, 1 touchdown. So the stats aren't explosive, but he's been a consistent guy in their offense. In terms of the team offense, what a jump. They are first in total offense and points scored. They're 6th in the passing attack. Daniel Jones is leading the 6th leading passing attack in the league. That's insane. I would never imagine saying that a year before this. And they are 7th in the rushing attack. That one doesn't surprise me. One of the better running backs in the league with Jonathan Taylor. You want to compare it to last year? 17th in total offense. 25th in passing attack. 8th in the rushing attack. So, I already mentioned him, but I got to give kudos to Daniel Jones. He's kind of on the Sam Darnold arc right now, where he is hoping for a career revitalization, and so far he's shown it. And I'll give him even more props, because right now he's playing with a fractured fibula. That's insane. Playing with a broken bone in your shin, and he's running around. They're like, oh, it's a non-weight-bearing bone. He's fine. I would imagine getting tackled low on a broken fibula does not feel good. So, props to him. He's was with the Giants for the longest time. He was a bust. The Giants organization didn't do a whole lot to support him overall. He's a backup to the Vikings. Kind of a prove-it deal. Insurance for Anthony Richardson. And then, he kind of won the job, and then there was really no contest in terms of a competition when your backup quarterback fractures his orbital bone with a stretch band. I've never read that sentence ever in my life. Anthony Richardson is top 10 goober of all time, honestly.
But he could really dunk a basketball, though. That's what you don't understand.
But in terms of John, and I know it's like, oh, you're talking more about other players than Tyler Warren. Well, he's a rookie. This is what I got to go off on. Daniel Jones, though, moving the offense, 5th in passing, 3,041 yards, 9th in touchdowns with 19. He's 4th in rushing touchdowns for quarterbacks, and he has 7 interceptions. And, of course, Jonathan Taylor is the engine to the offense as a whole. He's 1st in rushing yards, 1,282 yards. He's 1st in rushing touchdowns, 15. The defense, which doesn't get talked about enough, in my opinion, they're 9th in points allowed. They have a phenomenal D-line. Latu, Kwity Paye, DeForest Buckner, Neville Gallimore. I'm going to say his last name. Adebayo. I probably butchered it. You know who I'm talking about. And then their corners, of course they made the trade for Sauce Gardner, but Charkandrick Ward, some depth with Xavier Howard, Mike Hilton. They have some solid pieces on defense. And what's funny is I have made fun of my co-host here in the Colts franchise as a whole, because I've known that they've had this pretty phenomenal roster for the past few years. And the problem, they've been on this quarterback carousel, trying to find a different guy, rotating through, is it Carson Wentz? Is it Phillip Rivers? It's just rotating. And the reason why they've done it, they're trying to force the issue, is because they've had a competent O-line. They've had competent weapons on the offense. They had Tyler Warren this year, but Josh Downs and Alec Pierce, UC baby, Michael Pittman, and the defense has had these pieces on there, and some other guys that are no longer with the team that have been really good. So that's why they kind of been doing this quarterback carousel, trying to get a guy in there. And then, of course, out of all the guys that looks the most promising, it's Daniel Jones. So props to him. But Tyler Warren has been a phenomenal step in for a rookie tight end. I think people have gotten used to, just because of Brock Bowers coming in last year, he went off and, somebody, a player goes off or it starts a new trend. So now there's kind of been this expectation, at least I felt like this year, especially in the fantasy football space, is that, rookie tight ends are the move. And I'm like, this is one of the positions historically that takes one of the longest to develop in terms of being relevant for an offense and being a good pass blocker, a good run blocker, and being a good receiver, a good route runner. I feel like most players take a lot of time to develop in that role. And Tyler Warren has followed this recent trend where he can do a little bit of everything. And he does everything, blocking-wise. I would say he's average for for a tight end position. But that's not why they drafted him. They drafted him to be a receiving threat. He could split out wide. He's doing tush-push for him, if Daniel Jones isn't doing it, especially now with this fracture for Jones. But Tyler Warren is going to be one of those guys. I think he's having a phenomenal rookie tight end season. I think if Brock Bowers didn't have the year that he did last year, there would be more hype around the season that Warren is having this year. And I think, health permitting, this is going to be one of those guys that is going to be in the conversation for top 5 tight end probably for the next 10 years.
I'm totally with you on Tyler Warren. His floor for a rookie tight end is so high, and the Colts really needed somebody like him as a pressure valve to take the pressure off of Daniel Jones, easy dump-offs, good looks when you're in the red zone. Obviously, now you have 2 really potent weapons down there with Jonathan Taylor and Tyler Warren. So one rushing, one passing. It gives Indianapolis' offense a really unique look and something a lot of the elite teams also have. In terms of fantasy, historically tight end is one of my least favorite positions. I don't think that's something specific to me either. It's historically a position where there's a few guys who are pretty good, and then it's kind of like kickers, like a week-to-week basis type of thing. You can get away with starting some tight ends certain weeks who aren't very good, but they may be a touchdown threat depending on the matchup. And Tyler Warren is definitely one of those guys you're going to take in the top 6 rounds or higher because he's a dude who is going to produce. To me, if they had Tom Brady out there, obviously Tyler Warren would still be good. And if they had somebody like current Russell Wilson out there, I think he'd still be good because he's a big guy, he's a big presence, and he's going to command the ball. Now, I'd like to see Tyler even get more involved in the Colts offense, but Steichen, he likes to spread it around, and he is a coach who really wants to lean on Jonathan Taylor right now, and I think that's exceptionally smart because of Taylor's talent, his veteran presence, and the offensive line, and wanting to take pressure off of Daniel Jones. But Steichen can honestly probably get Tyler Warren even more involved in the offense if they schemed it up that way. But he's still a rookie, and that's where we're at this point in the season. The other thing I want to throw out there about the Colts is they haven't, they're 8-4 right now. They haven't been out of a single game. They have been competitive every single game, and I think that bodes well going forward for Indianapolis and Daniel Jones. I've always been of the mind that the Colts have been good. They have not had a quarterback post Andrew Luck who was good enough to lead them to the promised land, whether that be a divisional title or the AFC Championship game. The heights of that could only have been reached with Andrew Luck under center. Post Andrew Luck, the best season came from Phillip Rivers. We gave him his flowers last week. He did have a good season, but Phillip Rivers was old. He wasn't going to hang around like that. We've had Wentz. We've had guys like Joe Flacco. We've had Jacoby Brissett. Nobody really stuck. They're just kind of backup, veteran dudes, plug-and-play guys. Daniel Jones is the first dude who's really been able to harness the offense under Shane Steichen, who I've been a fan of. A lot of Colts fans weren't big fans of Shane Steichen's, after these past 2 years. I've been of the mind that Shane is a good coach. He's just had a bad quarterback situation. And, You know me, Logan. We were together on the draft when they took Anthony Richardson in the first round. I believe you have a video of me looking absolutely devastated because, and again, nothing against Anthony Richardson personally. I think he's probably a decent dude. But as a football player, I was never into that. I was never into Anthony Richardson. He was too much of a project. I'm a Kentucky football fan. And when you play poorly against Kentucky football, even if their defense is decent, but if you play poorly against a middling Kentucky team and you're supposed to be a top quarterback prospect and you're out here throwing pick sixes, I do not trust you. I do not trust you. And Anthony Richardson was never able to get it done. I begrudgingly was like, I hope he does it, but he never really did. Coming into this season, Steichen made the right call committing to Daniel Jones because he knew that Daniel Jones was going to run the offense in the way Steichen wanted it. If Steichen can make Jalen Hurts a competent, good NFL quarterback, but he couldn't do that with Anthony Richardson, and then he shows that he can do it again with Daniel Jones, to me, it's not Steichen's fault. It's Anthony Richardson's fault. He's not putting in the work. He's leaning too much on his rushing talent. He's not reading the playbook like he needs to. And that's been the problem with the Colts is they took the wrong guy at the top of the draft, and we've been paying for it ever since. Now, to circle it back to Warren, when you have a good offense and you are confident as a coach, such as Shane Steichen, in your ability to call plays, you need a guy who's your rock. And he's like, if I'm going to be here past this year and Daniel Jones is going to be here, I need a rock. And Tyler Warren is that rock. Looking at his stats, I mean, he had a 4-game stretch here from week 4 to 7 where he scored over 10 points. Obviously, tight end production is going to be a little less than other positions, such as wide receiver and running back. But starting Tyler Warren has proven to be a pretty good option in a weak tight end league. We have old Travis Kelce. We do have Brock Bowers on the come up. He's going to be good. Tyler Warren's going to be there with him. I think Tyler's ceiling is going to be a little bit lower than Brock's just because of the way the Colts run the offense. And I just think the Raiders are going to lean more on Brock Bowers going forward. But to wrap this up, I'm really excited as a Colts fan for Tyler Warren. He is in the mold of somebody who I really loved in my childhood, Dallas Clark. The Colts have historically had good tight ends, and to draft another one in the first round, and you're going to see a lot of Tyler Warren jerseys at Colts games going forward. I'm actually going to the Colts Jags at the end of the year. I'm really excited to see that and watch Tyler Warren play. Hopefully, we're going to still be in first place, playing a competitive Jaguars team on the verge of the playoffs. So, with that being said, Tyler Warren, you're my dude. Daniel Jones, you're my dude. Let's keep winning. Go Colts.
Oh, that hurts my soul to hear that. But I do agree. He's a phenomenal player. The Colts are set up right now. I'm curious to see what they do next year with Daniel Jones because this was a 1-year deal, and I want to see do they keep him? Do they find another guy? I'd be surprised if they found another guy, to be honest with you. I think they'll find a way to keep him around. Do you have one more kind of pop-off player, a boom, or are we onto the bust now? Or disappointments, I should say.
I do have one more guy, and we don't have to spend a ton of time on him, although I think he deserves it, and it's Jackson Smith-Njigba from the Seattle Seahawks. Again, Seattle is constantly one of the most underrated sports franchises of all Big Four North American sports franchises. I mean, Seattle is consistently competitive, and Jackson Smith-Njigba is the anchor to one of the most low-key offenses in the league. And I call him low-key because I feel like people don't talk about him as much as some teams like the 49ers or other, teams who have more star players. But Jackson Smith-Njigba is out there in Seattle with Sam Darnold coming over from Minnesota, and all he's done is become one of the scariest receivers in the league. He's able to put that talent on display finally because they don't have Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. And Seattle's management, I think, knew that this season they were like, or going into this season, they're like, hey, DK's kind of a black hole. I think DK's reputation and the idea of DK Metcalf, of like this jacked dude who runs really fast, and the idea of DK Metcalf is a lot better than what we've actually seen from him on the field. Jackson Smith in Njigba is a guy who's able to put it all together. He can create separation. He can get open. He's a good route runner. And he's just so low-key. He's just a production monster. And you really love those guys in fantasy because they're the anchors of teams. Jackson Smith in Njigba has only scored under 10 points in a game twice this year. He played pretty poorly against Minnesota. They did win 26-0, but he's only scored under 10 points twice this year. He had a 9-pointer against Arizona in week 4. But other than that, I mean, he's been a complete monster. He's one of the leading receivers in terms of yardage in the National Football League. He's top 5 in, receptions. He's, top 5 in touchdowns, he's top 10 in touchdowns, top 10 in receptions. So anyway, to bring it back, Jackson Smith and Njigba, he's been a really good player this season. And with DK Metcalf out of the fold, with Tyler Lockett out of the fold, with Sam Darnold in at quarterback, able to provide some consistency and some big playability out there, throwing the ball, he's elevated Seattle to one of the best teams in the NFC. And I expect them to be competitive in the playoffs, largely because of the production they're getting from Jackson Smith and Njigba. So to me, it's pretty self-explanatory of why he's good. He just needed an opportunity to show that on a bigger stage. Seattle opened it up for him. Now he's good. And I'm really excited to see what the Seahawks do here going forward to end the season, because they are in contention for the division title.
No, you're right. Seattle, the Seahawks, are a phenomenal team. Their defense is kind of not the same aura as the Legion of Boom days, but they are monsters on that end. In terms of the rushing attack, the rush defense, pass defense, they have rebuilt that unit over the past few drafts, and they are a nightmare for their offenses to run into. It's just unfortunate they're in the same division as the 49ers and the Rams. Man, they are those are 3 phenomenal teams, and they're just beating the hell out of each other. But JSN, I think he's probably one of the more obvious picks for our subject today, because, like you said, he's having a phenomenal year. He's already passed all the categories last year for receiving yards, receptions, the 7 touchdowns to the 6. He's playing out of his mind. Ohio State is just this factory of wide receivers. I feel like there was one that comes out of the draft every year. You just plug them in, and then there you go. Oh, look at that. Top 2 wide receiver on your team. And then, like you said, other wide receivers have moved on with Lockett and Metcalf through trades, or they let him go, and he's just been given the spot. He is the guy there, and he can play the X. He can play the slot. He can play the Z. He can, they're sending him out on motion routes. He beats you in every single category. Beats you in zone, beats you in man, beats you deep. He'll slice you up with his routes and his cuts. He's a phenomenal player. This is one of those guys that we saw the inkling of it last year, and then this is when DK got traded to the Steelers, and we're like, okay, there's a good possibility. A lot of people coming in that like this might be his year, and he is exploded. He's done phenomenal. I thought he would have a good season coming in. I didn't think he'd be leading almost every category coming in. Being one of these guys it's like, oh wow, we have another new face in the league for wide receivers. But he was highly touted coming out of college with Ohio State. He was one of those guys that as soon as he walked in, onto the field for the Buckeyes, he was going to be one of those wide receivers getting drafted, in the top 3 in terms of his position. He's And to be honest with you, in terms of the other receiving threats, he's kind of a solo guy. I'm not trying to put down his teammates or anything, but he's running the show. He really is. He's one of those guys I'm very excited to watch throughout the rest of the season when they're in the playoffs. When, especially, I want to see him how he does against. He's already been facing tough defenses, but I just want to see it at the highest level. I want to see him do some crazy stuff. We can continue to hype him up, and I am excited to see what he does down the road with him and Sam Darnold. His chemistry continues to build.
Yeah, he commands the offense out there, and we all know that he played at Ohio State with Garrett Wilson, who was highly touted. He played with Chris Olave, another really under-the-radar good fantasy player this year. People don't talk about him as much because of the Saints and their quarterback situation. But when you're surrounded, and it's kind of like you could make a comparison to his situation in Seattle for the past couple of years and the Ohio State situation, is he's always been surrounded by these guys who kind of take the shine away from him. But once you get him out there on his own, and now he's kind of on an island by himself, ready to produce, he's stepped up to the plate and he's knocked it out of the park and become one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. He's going to get paid. He's going to lead Seattle's offense if he remains in Seattle for a long time. And he's been another reason people believe in Sam Darnold. Like, Sam's not, he does a lot for the team. He's a great quarterback. He's always been a great quarterback, in my opinion. But when you give a guy like Sam Darnold, a Jackson Smith and Njigba, or a Justin Jefferson, it's going to take a lot of pressure off of him, and it's going to raise his floor, and that's what we're seeing right now. He has made Seattle viable on offense in a situation where they otherwise probably wouldn't have been very good. I can't, like you said, Kenneth Walker, he's had a pretty poor season this year. I drafted him in fantasy, hasn't been great. You have Sam Darnold. I can't think of another one of their wide receivers off the top of my head. I'm sure I'd have to look at a list or something, but it all comes down to JSN out there. And the last thing, this is a little bit more of a fun thing, but his brother plays Major League Baseball, so shout out to him. He needs to learn how to hit a little better, but he is a kind of a fringe roster guy, maybe like Klay Thompson's brother Trace, only not as established. But I did want to give my dude a shout out because of Major League Baseball. So anyway, that's JSN. Now we're going to move into the busts, and this is a category where I don't want to be too hard on these guys. I've never played football. I feel like I'm going to say that every podcast that we talk about football. So this is just analysis from our end. We don't want to be haters, but objectively, they have not performed up to expectations. So who's number one on your list for busts?
Bust is a very strong word here because he is a phenomenal player. I'm going to say disappointment, because when I say bust, it makes me think that this guy doesn't have any chance to come back or rework it this season or down the line. This is one of the faces of the leagues, a 28-year-old from Penn State. I realize that I've had 2 North Carolina and 2 Penn State players now. And that's Mr. Saquon Barkley, number 3 in the MVP voting last season. It's a different song. It's a different tune this year. Currently, he's coming in 198 carries, 740 yards, 3.74 yards a carry, 4 touchdowns. He is catching the ball a little bit more this year, 35 receptions, 259 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's 16th in the league in rushing yards, and he's 29th in rushing touchdowns. As a team as a whole, they're 20th in total offense. They're 24th in the passing attack, and they're 22nd in the rushing attack. Although they're winning their division right now, those statistics tell me they're not going to be a very strong team as of right now into the playoffs, if they make the playoffs. In terms of defense, it's a little bit better on that side, but it's still not the same what it was the past couple years. 9th in total defense in terms of points allowed, 17th in passing defense, 23rd in rushing defense. In terms of Saquon individually, his pop-off games, And when I say pop-off games, I'm talking about for this year. So if you're like, that's not very impressive, I'm like, that's the point I'm trying to make. Week 1 against Dallas, 18 carries, 60 yards, a touchdown, 4 catches, 24 yards. Week 2 against Kansas City, 22 carries, 88 yards, 1 touchdown. Week 4 against Tampa Bay, 19 carries, 43 yards, 1 touchdown, 4 catches for 31 yards. Week 8 against the Giants. Now this is the old Saquon. 14 carries, 150 yards, 1 touchdown, 4 receptions, 24 yards. And then I'm going to put this in the category of dud games. Week 3 against the Rams. That's a tough defense. I'm not going to put that all against them. 18 carries for 46 yards. Week 6 against the Giants. So, week 8 he popped off against them. Week 6, 12 carries for 58 yards. Week 7 against Minnesota, 18 carries for 44 yards. None of these stats are very impressive. I'd say the Week 8 Giants is like, okay, that sounds like a phenomenal week, but all the other ones, he's kind of carried by the touchdown for the most part. Now, if I were to compare it to last year, finished for 345 carries, over 2,000 yards rushing, 2005, 13 rushing touchdowns, 5.81 yards a carry. More than 2 yards a carry on the year when you're comparing last year to this year. 33 catches, 278 yards, 2 touchdowns. He was first in rushing. He's 8th in rushing touchdowns. Pro Bowler year, 3rd in the MVP race, already mentioned. In terms of the team offense and defense, they were 7th in total offense. They were 29th in passing attack, but 2nd in the rushing attack. And then in defense, 2nd in total defense, 1st in pass defense, 10th in rushing defense. And I'm going to do the pop-off games for last season, just to show you the comparison. Week 3 against New Orleans, 17 carries, 147 yards, 2 touchdowns. Week 9 against Jacksonville, 27 carries, 159 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 receptions, 40 yards, touchdown. Week 11 against Washington, one of the better defenses last year, surprise teams, 26 carries, 146 yards, 2 touchdowns. And then the behemoth game, Week 12 against the Rams, 26 carries, 255 yards, 2 touchdowns. I want to say it's a top 10 rushing in a single game in terms of yards of all time, NFL history. And then, his slump games, Week 6, Cleveland, 18 carries, 47 yards. Dallas, Week 10, 14 carries, 66 yards. You're kind of getting my point here, is that some of the games I'm telling you for the pop-off this year look the same as his slump games, his dud games last year. There's just a touchdown tacked onto it. So why the slump? Why is the drop-off here? Well, it's a loaded question. I think the overall offensive efficiency is decreased. The passing attack from Jalen Hurts is not the same than what it was last year. Even though they relied heavily on the run last year, Jalen Hurts I don't know if there's something going on. It doesn't look like he's as decisive on the run, kind of getting out of the pocket when he needs to. I don't know if it's something with his mechanics or what's going on. He's just not hitting those throws to A.J. Brown and Smith and Goddard like he was last year as consistently. It doesn't help that the offensive line has been banged up a good part of the year. Their guard, Landon Dickerson, yes, Tom Brady, that's how you pronounce it, and tackle Lane Johnson. Lane Johnson's a future Hall of Famer, and Dickerson, you can make the argument as well. Those guys have been in and out of the lineup for most of the year. It also doesn't help that this team, for the past 3-4 years, has had an assortment of different coordinators coming in and out because other teams will poach them. In an instance of this last year, who I think was a phenomenal OC, and I want to see what he does with the Saints, although this year was not great for them. I don't put it on him as the roster construction, but Kellen Moore was their offensive coordinator last year. And then their most recent OC was Kevin Patullo, which I found out very interestingly is that earlier this week, I guess Eagles fans found out where his house was in New Jersey, and his house got heavily egged for their, I guess, recent loss to Chicago. So I'm not out on Saquon. I just think the combination of injuries, loss of efficiency just between his teammates and himself. He's even came out and said that he kind of feels like he's in a slump, like something just isn't right. And maybe he's dealing with something. We just don't know. And then the change in the offense of coordinators, year and year and year. I think those guys are supplemented enough and been in there enough tenure-wise that they can have this change, but you're going to have a drop in efficiency when you have a different mindset on your play calls year to year to year. And if we don't feel like it's as good, and I've seen Eagles fans losing their mind because it's like, oh, it's 2nd and 10. What are we going to do? A halfback dive to the left, and and I've actually seen. I can't remember the name of the podcast, but they were interviewing a defensive player who had just played the Eagles, and they were asking, do you feel like their play calling is predictable? And he didn't say anything, but he's sitting there smiling. He gives a little wink, yeah, it's predictable. The defense knows what's coming. So a combination of all this is just a down year for Saquon. And in terms of fantasy perspective, depending on the league you're in, he might have been the first overall pick, or he might have been the first running back pick. And, he's not having a bad year, but he is not having the year that anybody expected to have, fantasy or not. It's just been disappointing. And I still think he's got some left in the tank. I just think Philly is one of these teams that has had all these pieces moving in and out of the roster for the past 2-3 years, because that's what happens when you're a top team. You can't afford to pay everybody. You're trying to fill in pieces, and you're not going to hit every hole in your roster perfectly every time. Now, they have one of the best GMs to do it, but nobody's 100%. And I just think it's regression. It's expected regression from last year. It's going to happen with every team. That's what's happening with Kansas City right now, too. There's regression.
It's a big trophy in the trophy case of Howie Roseman that coming off a Super Bowl and with all the tumult in the locker room and surrounding this team in the media, that they're leading the NFC East, even though Washington and New York are pretty much non-factors. I think that's a big win for Howie Roseman and how he's able to conduct team business day in and day out. Now, I happen to live with an Eagles fan, and I know a lot of Eagles fans. I probably know, I know the most Bengals fans in my life. That's who I have, fan base-wise. But I know the Eagles are probably number 2 on that list. And let me tell you something. They hate Kevin Patullo. I don't say dislike, I say hate, because they're Eagles fans, and they are pissed. Why? Because he's completely made this offense boring as all get out. It's a couple deep throws to A.J. Brown here and there. A.J. Brown has been pissed. He's been turning into a diva on social media. Davante Adams, he's talking about juicing like apples and oranges. They're in the midst of a playoff push, and they're just talking about this stuff. The other day, I was shown a tweet from Bleacher Report that the offensive line requested an emotional support rabbit, which is an inflatable rabbit that would be put into the locker room as a sign to kind of lighten up, hey, here we are, we're a team, let's have some fun. They're putting inflatable, and shout out to the rabbit, and I think it's lighthearted and fun and everything. I don't want to hate on that, but that's what they're kind of doing at this. They're pulling out anything at this point to get people motivated to care. The malaise of the post-championship run last year is very real, and Saquon Barkley has been part of that malaise. When I think about Saquon Barkley, I think about ups and downs. The talent is always high ceiling. Saquon is one of the most talented running backs ever to grace an NFL football field. He's a crazy athlete. He's a crazy weightlifter. He's just a great athlete. He's who you want at running back. But he's also banged up a little bit. He didn't have a great career situation in the beginning with the Giants. Last year, with his poster boy season for Philadelphia, them winning the Super Bowl, he had those crazy games against the Rams. He really bolstered their offense and took it over the top. He showed essentially everyone why he's one of the best running backs of his era, bar none. But then we get these seasons like what we're seeing this year, where he's been, not very great. He did have that one week where it was 150 yards and a touchdown against the Giants, the lowly Giants. Like you were saying earlier, that's a great week, but he had way more of those last year. Now, obviously, we can't expect a player to have Hall of Fame trajectory numbers every time he touches the football field. But with a guy whose reputation is like the ceiling is so high for Saquon, you expect a little more. Now, this year, he's really fallen off, and part of that is due to the malaise of their offense. Jalen Hurts has regressed. We have wide receivers feuding. They don't have the same spark that they did last year. And Saquon has really kind of just been a background character. He hasn't felt super relevant. And in terms of fantasy, when you draft him, at some cases, number one overall in the league, he's coming off a 2,000-yard season, and this is what you're getting from the guy who you drafted number one overall. What else can you call it but a very, very disappointing season? Now, this season is not who Saquon Barkley is, and I do think we could have another great season from Saquon Barkley looking forward. But the Eagles have to figure something out. They'll probably still make the playoffs. They'll probably still win the division, but they're not having a great season. And I don't want to bring up off-the-field stuff or get into politics about Saquon Barkley, but I think Saquon was a little distracted in the offseason, to be fair. He famously golfed with the president. People gave him a lot of backlash online for that. There was a lot of discussion about his girlfriend, and all of these conversations, his investment portfolio went viral. Like, all of these things surrounding him were not football related. And I think Saquon, at the end of the day, is a football player. He needs to be focused on football. Not that he can't do these other things, but I think the post Super Bowl kind of boost to his public profile, I think he got caught up in that a little bit, and it probably affected his mindset coming into this season. So I'm really hoping for Saquon that he could put this year behind him. You still don't know. He could have a great postseason, but it's not looking like Philadelphia is trending in that direction. And they're kind of looking like they could crash and burn a little bit if they don't right the ship. So Saquon, I think, is a great guy, great player, but I'd like to see a little more from him.
Yeah, the off-season stuff, can be distracting. I could see that. In a lot of teams, it's like you always hear about the Super Bowl slump and how many teams made it to the Super Bowl and they lose. And I think the higher odds that you will miss the playoffs the following year than to actually make it if you've lost the Super Bowl. Now, obviously, that wasn't the story last year, but it's so hard for teams to repeat, and we know this, and that's why dynasties, the Patriots, the Chiefs, the 49ers back in the day, they don't come around very often. Those are some different people. Those are some borderline, this is negative, but borderline psychopaths playing football that just lock in. I think, we talked about him a little bit last week, but Tom Brady and his mentality, he's one of those human beings that you may never meet in your actual lifetime. That's how unique and how focused and driven he is, to where it's almost an obsession. And in terms of sports, we idolize that, but not every player has that. And it's easy to kind of fall into the lull. And if Saquon and other players did, I don't blame them. It's tough to keep that shape and focus. It's easy for us to say. I've never won a Super Bowl. I've never been on, the face of a winning Super Bowl team, one of the most famous people, in February that year. It's a lot of stuff that I don't think it's easy for us to judge, but we'll never know what that feeling is.
Totally agree.
But I think he'll be back on top. We'll have to see what they do next year. I think sometimes you need a wake-up call, and potentially that's this year for him. But what is your, jumping onto that, what do you have for your next bust here, or disappointment?
My disappointment hit so close to home, it's ridiculous. Like, I feel like this disappointment, I'm standing on the target, and he has dropped a bomb on me from a B-52. And his name is Brian Thomas Jr. Now, clown me if you are watching this for some reason having so much of my team tied up in the success of the Jacksonville Jaguars. I don't know why. I didn't even intentionally do it. It kind of just ended up that way. But here I am. It's like Brian Thomas Jr. One league, I have Travis Etienne as my lead back. I have Trevor Lawrence in both leagues. It's insane, dude. I've had the kicker before. So Brian Thomas Jr. has just been nothing short of a complete letdown this year. And I don't want to be too harsh, but he has been an utter disappointment. So he's missed games, he's dropped balls, and he's pretty much been everything you don't want from a supposed top-tier wide receiver. Now, in fairness to people projecting these statistics out for fantasy-specific reasons, the natural ebb and flow of fantasy football is you're going to have disappointing guys. You're going to have some guys who fall off, famously like Monte Ball. The projection didn't work out for him. Brian Thomas had a pretty good year last year, all things considered. He had nearly 1,300 yards. He had 6 touchdowns. He played really well, and this year he's just not living up to that whatsoever. This year he has sub 500 yards. He has 1 touchdown. I have him in fantasy. He had 1 week where he had 15 points. Other than that, it's been I'm going to take it from week 1 on. 8 points, 4.9 points, 5.5, 5.6, 8. He had the 15-point game, 3.1, bye week, 5.5, missed 3 straight games, and then followed that up with a 2.8 stinker. Now, obviously, Trevor Lawrence is not the most consistent quarterback in the world. But for some reason, Brian Thomas and Trevor Lawrence just can't figure it out together. Brian Thomas famously played pretty well with Mac Jones last year. Mac Jones on the 49ers this year. He's not in the locker room. He's having to deal with Trevor Lawrence. And Trevor Lawrence and him just don't seem to have that much chemistry. He's also been banged up. So it's hard to develop chemistry with a guy if you're not even going to be that consistent. And the other thing about Brian Thomas, it's the Anthony Richardson thing. It's are you mailing it in? There's been questions about his effort throughout the season. He's a year 2 player. It's not like he's been in the league 5 years and has established himself. People were assuming he would continue to rise because Jacksonville does have some pieces. And bringing it back to the point I was kind of talking about earlier, when you're projecting players out for fantasy football, naturally there's going to be some ebb and flow. But he was projected to be one of the best wide receivers in fantasy this year. The reason it hit so close to home for me is because I drafted this man with a swing pick at I can't remember if it was the second round or the first round, but I drafted him at very high to be one of the anchors of my team. The 2 anchors of my team this year were Ashton Jeanty, who has averages 3.5 yards a carry. Not a bust, but a disappointment, I would say, fairly. He hasn't been bad, though. Brian Thomas has just been straight up bad. So when you spend your first 2 picks on these kind of players and they don't materialize, you're not going to have a very good season. And that's what happened to me. I'm not putting it all on them. I've had some mismanagement along the way. I'll take some accountability. But Brian Thomas has just not shown up for the Jaguars this season. And it's really kind of dinged his overall reputation, I think, in the league. Certainly the fantasy community has been talking about this, but other guys who are just more general sports commentators have noticed this. And I don't know, Brian Thomas is going to be maybe next year he'll be kind of a sexy, underrated pick for people coming off a disappointed season, maybe draft him in the 5th or 6th round kind of thing. But I don't know if he could reach the heights of being a 1st or 2nd round pick again. And it's just because he hasn't shown up this year for the Jaguars. And they're good. They are good. Not good in quotation marks. They're competing for the playoffs. They're in the midst of this. He's nowhere to be found. He's so I didn't start him this week in fantasy, even though he's healthy again, because I'm like, I can't rely on this guy. And other fantasy owners feel the same way. And you'll probably hit on this in a second, but I just want to bring it up, and I'll tee you up for it. Decker, before the season started, right after our draft, I had to leave our draft and go to one of my friends from college, had a baby shower, so I had to leave for that. I'm driving home from the draft. We have a 5-minute period we like to do after we each take our teams where it's like free trade period. So he texts me and offers me Trey McBride for Brian Thomas Jr., essentially. Like, there were other players involved, but those were the main two pieces. And I was thinking, because I was like, I thought I had a pretty good draft. It didn't break right for me this year, but in the midst of that, I'm like, this is honestly not too bad. If some things break right for me, I could have a pretty good season. So he offers me Trey McBride for Brian Thomas Jr., and me wanting to commit to the guy I committed to, I said no. Fast forward, Trey McBride is one of the best tight ends in the league. He is the best tight end in the league. What am I talking about? He's the best tight end in the National Football League, and I missed out on all of that production because I wanted to commit to a guy who just has not given the effort. He's been banged up. He doesn't have good chemistry with his quarterback, and I wish I knew this before I was going to take him with one of those high picks.
Well, the problem is there's in our league, and I won't drone on this for too long because people want to talk about football, not hear about our fantasy league, but there's a stigma with me in the league that usually if you trade with me, it doesn't work out the other person. So that's in the air in our league, and I have sealed at least one season with a preseason trade. So there's other reasons behind it. But going back to Brian Thomas Jr., I'm going to be a little bit defensive of him here, just because I paid fairly close attention. Not that I own him in any league, but what I do for a living, I'm interested in the injury side of it, especially in the professional sports lane. And coming into the preseason, I don't remember if it was preseason 2 or preseason week 3, BTJ got rocked. He got basically hospital ball, no surprise from Trevor Lawrence. Got hospital ball, and they initially thought he had fractured his ribs. He did not fracture them, but severely bruised, and you're like, oh, that doesn't sound bad. If you've ever been hit almost as hard as you can by another human being in the ribs, it doesn't feel good at all. So I do remember early in the season that he was getting called out fairly quickly. Like, oh, it doesn't look like he's trying to fight for the ball. He's alligator arming it. Well, not just on top of that injury, this is not an excuse for him because you got to do it. You're paid that amount of money, and you have those expectations where you have to play. But, he re-injured his ribs later on in the year. He has had a shoulder injury. He has sprained his wrist. He suffered a high ankle sprain in Week 9. That's his most recent injury against the Raiders. This man hasn't been fully healthy all year. And you're right. The other point is he's had a better connection with Mac Jones last year than he did with Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence tends to spread the ball out a little bit more. And I just don't feel like, BTJ, he's a deep threat. That's what he is. That's when he came out of college, and Mac Jones took advantage of that. And I don't see that with Trevor Lawrence. I just don't. It's a different kind of play style, those two. And I've seen on, some sidelines of the Jags, because once again, we're both fans of teams in the division, so we see way too many Texans, Jaguars, Colts, Titans games than the average person, is that their head coach Cohen doesn't get along, I would say, super, super well with Trevor Lawrence, because Trevor Lawrence is like, nah, I don't like this play, I'm going to change it. And Cohen's, you can see him visibly losing his mind on the sideline.
He seethes.
He seethes. So I expect BTJ to bounce back. I'm curious to see what his ceiling is if he has a fully healthy year with a Trevor Lawrence who could be fully healthy, because both of those guys have had injuries back and forth. I want to see if they're able to actually establish some sort of true chemistry, because, obviously, hey, last year, rookie year, Mac Jones played, I feel like, more snaps than Trevor Lawrence did. And this year, Brian Thomas has been in and out of the lineup, and when he's been in, he hasn't been 100%. And he hasn't looked like the best wide receiver in the team between, let's say, Parker Washington. They just added, who's the guy from the Raiders? Jacoby Myers. He's been phenomenal stepping in. Yeah, he hasn't had the time to mellow this year, and to be quite frank, it wouldn't surprise me if it stays similar role or similar target percentage throughout the end of the year, no matter how Jacksonville ends up, because they're at that spot right now where they're contending for the division, and I believe the Colts and Jaguars play today. Is this correct?
Yeah.
So the division leader will be determined after today. We're recording potentially game right now. I don't remember if they play at 1 and 4, but I believe they play at 1. So regardless, I do have high hopes for BTJ in the future to get back on track. He's a super talented player. He will find his way, but it has been a very disappointing season.
I don't mean to cut you off. This is a live reaction right now. So Logan and I are not watching football. We were recording the pod. We started this at 11:30. Daniel Jones is down with a lower leg injury, non-contact injury. Dove Kleiman, the freaking aggregator account on Twitter, said this looks really, really bad. I just had a text from one of my buddies in the Colts chat. I mean, they're saying maybe he tore his Achilles. I'm looking at the video right now. He's reaching towards his Achilles. Oh, my gosh, dude. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, that was an awkward...
Well, looks like Anthony Richardson is going to be... Looks like it was good not to trade him to the Rams. Anyway, I just wanted to do a live reaction to that. I was puffing my chest earlier. My boys, oh, my gosh, dude. This is what it's like to be a fan of an AFC South team, man. Why do we do this to ourselves? Anyway.
I don't know. That's a tough injury. That didn't look good. I don't want to derail us, but, yeah, his pivot off of his plant leg, that did not look good. I wouldn't say it's one of those gruesome injuries, but you can tell if you're watching that it was awkward, and I don't expect good news once they get the official results.
Also, the Jags are wearing those, 90s throwbacks jerseys. I really like those. Those are nice. Jags, wear those forever. Make those your primaries. But anyway, so we're talking about Brian Thomas Jr., Who's next on your bust list?
This is a guy that I think this might be the end of the road for him with how he's played this year. And I don't think it's not all of his fault. It's not. He had a Cinderella story in terms of a career resurgence, and you could make the argument that he might have been the start of this recent, let's say, quarterback reformation movement, where you give a guy a second chance, and it turns out he still got gas left in the tank, and he just wasn't in the good setup to begin. And that's Geno Smith, good old mountaineer from West Virginia, 35 years old. In terms of stats this year, 67% completion percentage, not bad. 2,532 yards. It's 211 yards a game. Not great. Not good, really. 15 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, 46 sacks taken. I think that's the key stat there. And in terms of where he looks at the rest of the league, he's 15th in passing yards, 19th in touchdowns. He's tied for first in interceptions with Tua this year. He's second in sacks taken behind my quarterback, Cam Ward. He's 84th, or I should say 84 passer rating, which is 29th in the league. That beats only, I would say, 4 notable starting quarterbacks, or had started at some point. Trevor Lawrence, which is surprising, Dylan Gabriel, Joe Flacco, and Cam Ward. In terms of the team offense this year, they're 31st in points scored. They're 26th in passing offense and yards, 32nd in rushing offense. He's not getting a lot of help. Defensively, 26th in total defense and points allowed. 15th in passing defense. Solid. That doesn't surprise me with Max Crosby and some of their other pieces. They're 23rd in rushing defense. In terms of pop-off games, I don't have a whole lot. I got 2, Week 3 against Washington, 19 for 29, 289 yards, 3 touchdowns. Pretty good. 5 sacks taken. Okay. Week 9 against Jacksonville, 29 of 39, 284 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. I don't think he was sacked that game. I didn't write it down, and I'm pretty sure he's been sacked in every single game except for one. I think that's why I included in there. His dud games. I could have the rest of the season on here, but I'm going to pull just a few individual ones. Week 2 against the Chargers, 24-43, 180 yards, 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 3 sacks. Week 10 against Denver, 16 of 26, 143 yards, 1 interception, 6 sacks taken. This is the big one. Week 12 against Cleveland, 20 of 44, 285 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions. Hey, that's pretty good. He was sacked 10 times. The Raiders are basically the reason why Myles Garrett has made a huge jump and probably will break the sack record this year. Besides Myles Garrett being a phenomenal player and probably one of the best pass rushers in our lifetimes. Well, what did he do in last year in Seattle? You know, that's the lookout there. So, in terms of stats, around similar passing completion percentage, 70%, 4,320 yards, 21 touchdowns, 15 interceptions, 93.2 passer rating, still 50 sacks taken. But he was 4th in passing yards, 13th in passing touchdowns. He's 3rd in interceptions, 3rd in sacks taken, and he was about average with passer rating. You know, he's 19th in the league. The average is 92.3, and he was dead on average, same number. You know, offensively, much more support, 18th total offense, 8th in passing, 28th rushing. Defense was much better, 12th in total defense, 11th in passing defense, 16th in rushing defense. And then I'll do this one quickly. His best year in Seattle was his first full year as a starter. 69% passing percent completion, 4,289 yards, 30 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 46 sacks taken, 100.9 passer rating. He's 8th that year in passing yards, 4th in touchdowns, 10th in interceptions, 4th in sacks taken, 5th in passer rating. League average 89.1 that year. You know, when he came to Seattle after his stint with the Jets and being backup, he finally got the chance, and he looked solid. You know, he might have had more turnovers than you would like from a quarterback, but he was putting up the stats in terms of yardage. He was putting up touchdowns. He was very good in terms of consistency with converting, marching the ball down the field. This dude is a pocket passer, though. He does not have wheels, and that's why I put emphasis on the sack totals, is that this man, if he has a bad offensive line, he does not have the wheels to get out of it. He is going to get crushed. He's going to collapse. And that is honestly, the biggest reason why he has struggled with the Raiders. You know, he gets reunited with his old head coach, Pete Carroll, long time. But he goes from their most recent head coach with the Seahawks, who I really like, Mike McDonald, and they had great offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak, who has been around the league for decades. Fantastic coordinator. And then you move on to Pete Carroll, who, oldest coach in the NFL as of right now, and Chip Kelly as your offensive coordinator. And if you remember that name, he was, at one point, the head coach for the Eagles. He is not a well-liked man in the NFL. He's a pretty good college coach, but he's already been fired at this point this year and replaced with interim Greg Olson. Not the Greg Olson you're thinking of. That would be awesome, but not him. Different Greg Olson. But I think the biggest issue is the offensive line for Las Vegas has been terrible for years. His immobility and his age has played into that. And I think in terms of weapons, because the offensive line has been so bad and they struggle to pass protect or open up rushing lanes, their first-round pick, Ashton Jeanty, does not have the space, the room to do explosive plays like he did with Boise State. He does not have the room to make it happen. And I've seen him. It's not like he's bad. He has made great plays, broken tackles, making moves. It's just him. It's just him trying to do it all himself. So the running game is pitiful. And then, Jacoby Myers didn't really want to be there. I think he's a really good receiver. I think he's a solid number 2 receiver, but he's out. Your best receiver now is Trey Tucker. No offense to Trey Tucker, but he's not a wide receiver 1. I think he's a good 3, but he's not a 1. And your best offensive weapon is your tight end, Brock Bowers, who is a phenomenal weapon. But the Raiders just don't have the infrastructure to support I'll be nice and say above average quarterback, who doesn't have wheels, who's on the other side of the hill in terms of age in his career. And it's one of those things where, yes, you might have got paid well, but there's certain franchises in the NFL, if you go there, I don't know how much career success you're going to have. And the Raiders is one of those organizations where they are a team that, they consistently, at least they know they're bad and they try to rebuild, and they just don't ever do it right. Early 2000s, they were one of the juggernauts in the league, and ever since, I can think of the snow game against the Patriots and Tom Brady. I don't think they've been in the playoffs since that game. They haven't been back, between the different head coaches that they've had, the Davis ownership. That's been an interesting run. It's just one of those I don't want to say poverty franchise, but they need to do a true rebuild. And putting the Band-Aid on with Geno Smith, I didn't think it would go well. But I didn't think this would potentially be his last year as a starting quarterback in the NFL. I didn't think it'd be that bad.
Las Vegas, or the Raiders, is where careers go to die in the NFL. It's one of a few franchises, like you were saying. I'm going to pick up the ball here. Commanders, Cowboys, Raiders. If you're an old veteran, not even just a quarterback, if you're an old vet and one of those teams gives you a call, you're either a problem in the locker room or you are a guy who they're just trying to squeeze the last little bit of juice out of. Unfortunately for Geno Smith, he looks like one of those juice squeeze guys. I actually was of the opposite opinion going into the year. Although it was a little unorthodox with Pete Carroll, I thought the Raiders could be okay. I actually thought with Ashton Genty, with Geno Smith, they didn't have really good receiver depth. Jacoby Myers was their best receiver, but he's not a bad player. He's just not a 1 at all. I don't even know if he's necessarily a 2, but I thought the Raiders could be all right. They are in a tough division, but with competent head coaching experience, with a guy like Pete Carroll, with a running back safety valve who could absorb a lot of carries like Ashton Genty, I thought that could put Geno in a position to succeed. And I never envisioned Geno playing as well as he had in years past, but I didn't think it would be an outright disaster. Funny enough, I'm looking at his Fantasy Pros page right here, and it's just to show you how much of how different it is, a good and bad quarterback season compared to 20 years ago. Because we were talking about Jake Plummer last podcast, and there was seasons where he had 20 interceptions. And Geno Smith right now, 15 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, 2,500 yards approximately. Not great. He's got a few more games left in the season. The Raiders are a dumpster fire. They are one of the worst teams in the league, and they're going nowhere fast, especially with this configuration of their roster. I think you're correct. There needs to be a rebuild in Las Vegas, but with Mark Davis at the helm, I don't know if that's possible because it feels like the Raiders are playing to sell tickets to out-of-towners coming into Las Vegas to watch the games. I went to Las Vegas for the first time a couple weeks ago. It's my first time in the city. I had a good time. I enjoyed it. Pretty expensive. But I saw the Raiders Stadium. It's beautiful. But as I was walking around, the Raiders, it was the week they played Dallas. And yeah, there's Raiders fans about, but it's not like what I would envision in Oakland or Los Angeles even. there was way, way more Cowboys fans. I'm talking like 10 times the Cowboys fans than Raiders fans. Now, obviously, like people who are Raiders fans that live in Vegas, they're probably out in the suburbs, et cetera, et cetera. They're not walking around the strip where all the tourists are. But I couldn't help but feeling like there wasn't a lot of energy for the Raiders out in Las Vegas. And I know they were bad, but even so, they still got a cool logo, cool uniforms. I just didn't feel like there was any energy involving the Raiders. There was, obviously, with the Cowboys. Funny enough, the team I saw the most gear from out in Vegas was the Los Angeles Dodgers, which was pretty wild. Shout out baseball. But with Geno, there's just not a lot left in the tank. And I was honestly pretty surprised he was able to elongate his career this far into his 30s. Geno Smith is a dude who was drafted when we were in high school. He's 35 years old now. He didn't really have a good start to his career. And like you mentioned earlier, he was one of the first guys in this kind of modern era that we're thinking of, like the past 5 or 6 years, to be the reclamation project that worked out. He had a level of trust with Pete Carroll. He was Russell Wilson's backup. He learned the offense when they inserted Geno Smith into the offense post-Russell Wilson. Seattle maintained a level of offensive production and dignity because of Geno Smith being having continuity with the coaching staff and the offensive line and the receivers. That's not really there in Las Vegas anymore. He's a mercenary in that town. So it's not like he was there as a backup for a while and then he was able to be thrust into a situation that was a competent one, like out in Seattle. The Raiders, say what you will, they've never been accused of being competent. Let's just say that. It's a poorly run franchise with a great fan base that's been mistreated for years, and I feel really bad for their fans. But with Geno specifically, I thought this is a personal fantasy story, so I was looking for a quarterback after Jaden Daniels got hurt. I drafted Jaden Daniels in 2 leagues. He got hurt. One of the leagues, I believe, I picked up Michael Penix, and he was horrendous. It was the week Michael Penix had -3 points. And he played Carolina maybe he played Carolina and it was really bad. Anyway, I'll never touch Michael Penix again in fantasy after that. But the other league, I can't remember if it was ours or my other one, I picked up Geno Smith, and he did equally as bad. And at that time, I remember thinking, I was like, okay, Geno Smith, this is a guy who could get me 15 points. This is not a travesty. I know he's out in the waivers, but to me, he was in the upper echelon of the waiver wire. Kind of a guy who maybe could be a diamond in the rough. It just wasn't that case. He was bad, and he's been bad for the entirety of the season. And it's really a shame because we've come to know and love Geno Smith and respect Geno Smith for the work he's put in. He's one of the best stories in the NFL as far as reviving his career, putting his nose down, getting to the grindstone, and reviving his career. He learned how to play quarterback at the highest level. He had the talent, but he didn't really know how to play quarterback in the NFL. Then he learned how to do it and became good, and that's when he became the Geno Smith we know and love. But now, at 35, it looks like he's cooked, and that's unfortunate because we all really respect him as a football player.
Yeah, he's had a phenomenal story, and, you hate to see it with any quarterback, but they're gonna hit the end eventually, and I don't think he's necessarily done. I just don't. He might just be a clipboard guy from here on out. I can see that, and I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. Go to a better situation, be the backup, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I still think he has the acumen to be productive. I just think he's in a terrible situation, and maybe he's just, all right, I'm going to take some money as a clipboard holder. I'm going to be the second guy, and if somebody goes down, I'm going to step in, and I'm going to do, above average I'm going to be one of the best backup quarterbacks potentially in the league. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't know if that's what he wants to do, but I think I would like to think that Geno is probably aware of quarterback situations around the league and where he's at in his career, and maybe he takes the Joe Flacco role. He's like, you know what? I'll take my paycheck. If you need me, let me know. I'll be ready, but I'm here. So, in terms of the next guy that we got coming up here, is back to you. Who is your next bust or disappointment?
My next disappointment played opposite of Brian Thomas Jr. for the Jacksonville Jaguars. You know him, but you know him as a Colorado Buffalo, probably. It's Heisman Trophy winner Travis Hunter. Now, the two-way Shohei Ohtani-esque phenom Travis Hunter, Deion Sanders, like pseudo-adopted son, I don't want to disparage him in any way because we don't know how his career is going to end up. We don't know how Liam Cohen is going to use him going forward. We don't know if he's going to come off on offense a little bit and play more defense. That was his position in high school and at Colorado. I think that's really where his bread was buttered, was at the cornerback position. But Jacksonville trades up to get him in this past draft, and they play him as a wide receiver, which I always thought was odd because I thought, yes, he was a good wide receiver, but he wasn't to me, like a true wide receiver prospect. Like, I thought Jacksonville should have played him at corner more and taught him how to play defense at a high level in the NFL and then kind of worked him in on offense. And it seemed like what Jacksonville did was the opposite. They tried to work him in some on defense, but gave him more focus on offense because they had a hole at wide receiver. And to me, when you're just decent at both things, but you don't excel at either one, that's a really weird and poor position to be in if you're a football player. So I think going into next year, not that he can't play wide receiver at a high level, because he definitely has the talent to. He's one of the most talented players to ever be drafted into the NFL, in fairness. Not that he doesn't have that talent, but I think he needs to commit to one side and then be sprinkled in on the other. And I think where Jacksonville needs him more is on defense. To me, wide receiver has turned into the running back position a little bit, to where there are plenty of guys who they could take to fill another receiver hole on Jacksonville. I know we kind of excoriated Brian Thomas Jr. a little bit earlier on the pod, but if Jacksonville truly believes in Brian Thomas and being a one, and then they go ahead and trade for Jacoby Myers, who's a very consistent number 2 or 2.5 even, you have pretty decent receivers going forward if Brian Thomas remains to be good, if he gets back on track. That means Travis Hunter could be a really, really good wide receiver 3, and you could take more shots with him and put him in specific situations to succeed rather than putting him out there and, running him to death every play, because you also expect him to play on defense. And that's where I think Jacksonville made a mistake in his development. And it's not even really Travis Hunter. I don't think there's anything wrong with him as a player. I know he's been hurt. He's been on IR since, I believe, Week 9. He hasn't played since Week 9. Funny enough, in Week 7, he actually had his best offensive game as a pro, where he had 101 yards and a touchdown. So there is evidence that he could be a good NFL wide receiver. But I think Jacksonville needs to focus his efforts on quarterback. I want to tie this into something I know a little bit more about, which is baseball. And there's this two-way athlete thing that gets thrown around a lot. And Travis Hunter, for all intents and purposes, at Colorado in college, was a two-way superstar. Great on offense, great on defense. That's what he was billed as going into the NFL. That's what made him such an intriguing prospect in the draft, and why Jacksonville decided to make a trade up for him. You expect in the NFL that he's going to play corner and wide receiver. When I tie it into Shohei Ohtani, which people talk about as a two-way superstar in baseball, because he is a true two-way superstar in baseball, Shohei Ohtani plays primarily on offense. That's where his bread is buttered. And he comes in kind of as a mercenary pitcher. He can pitch really, really well. He's one of the best pitchers in the league, talent-wise. But he's not going to go out there and give you a bunch of innings because you need Shohei Ohtani on offense. And the difference between baseball and football is the amount of physical activity that is being exerted into the sport. Pitching is hardcore. Like, it's not, I'm not saying he's out there like running around like soccer or football, but like, you got to be out there, you got to be eating innings, and Shohei Ohtani is not that kind of a pitcher. You can spot pitch him in big situations in the playoffs. He can give you about 10 to 15 starts a year, but he's never going to give you like 30 starts or anything. You need him focused on offense. With Travis Hunter, he can't be out there running around covering wide receiver ones, which he was drafted to do, essentially, cover wide receiver ones, and then also turn around and put him on offense and have him run these like creative routes and give him the ball and expect him to make plays. He's going to be exhausted. I don't care how good of an athlete he is. So they really need a game plan on how to utilize Travis Hunter going forward. I call him a bust, but really it's more of a disappointment. And it's not even his fault. I would just really like to see him used in a smarter way next year because I do think he could be really impactful. Personally, I just think he should play on the defensive side more and then kind of trickle him into the offense, similar to Deion Sanders, who was a great defender, great in coverage. He did play offense because he was sprinkled into the offense. It wasn't like they were lining him up a bunch of times. So anyway, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this as somebody who played corner, wide receiver for our football team.
That is a fantastic player and a great topic because I have somewhat of a strong opinion about it. I think he's a talented player. He obviously is. You know, he won the Heisman. I question, and this is me, this is going to sound bad to some college people, but college football fans, but I question the level of competition, Big 12 versus Big 10 SEC, and I know this sounds like elitist, but when you're playing at Colorado and your schedule isn't necessarily the toughest in the nation by any means, I do think Travis Hunter probably got more opportunities to showcase his talents that maybe some other players across the nation wouldn't be able to, and that definitely helped his draft stock. Now, what I have a problem with, I don't have any concern, you know, you want to play, you know, we're going to be mainly offense, sprinkle you on defense and vice versa. I don't really have an opinion on which side he should be on. I also thought he was a better corner coming out than a wide receiver, but I think if you're talented enough and you put in the work, which he's obviously talented, he could play any position that he wanted to. I question his thought process and the head coach's process, Cohen's, of you need to pick one first and develop. That's going to be the one you play on. We'll sprinkle in the other stuff because I agree. I think he's good at both, potentially great at both, but it's football. You cannot play both ways. You know, be an Iron Man. That doesn't exist anymore. You will get hurt. He is hurt now. And it was interesting coming out of camp. You know, I like to dive in, especially with fantasy football, but just in general interest. I remember reading quite a few articles saying that they were a little shocked that Travis Hunter's receiving acumen, his skills, were not as they were expected. He was disappointed. They were disappointed. It's like his route running is not great and this and that. I'm like, well, yeah, every time I see a highlight of Travis Hunter in college, it's the deep ball. He's just burning people deep. So it's the fact, you know, not necessarily the player. The player thinks he's Superman. You're coming out of college, number 2 overall Heisman. I don't potentially expect that type of maturity out of a 21, 22-year-old who feels like he's the king of the world. But as an organization, you have to have a plan. And it sounds like the way it does. Do you not have a plan? You traded up to get him. You gave up assets for the next year to get this guy, and you haven't even determined if you want to do defense or offense first. At least come out to the media and act like it. They're like, oh, we'll do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I just didn't like how they approached it. I didn't like how they handled it. And then when he was playing offense, I just felt like I was watching early years Wan'Dale Robinson. It's just like, oh, here's a little screen pass, screen pass, screen pass. I'm like, you're just letting him be a playmaker. You're not letting him go down the field. Why aren't you letting him go down the field? Do you not trust him? Because I don't recall seeing any plays or anything. Just going through his stat line. Be like, oh, you're 7 catches for 40 yards and no touchdown or something. I know I sound like I'm being really rough here, but I think he can be a phenomenal talent. I just heavily question the Jaguars and their use of him. And I have questioned... I think my biggest part, and this isn't his fault, this isn't the organization's fault, I think the biggest culprit of having this hype is the media. They put way, way too much weight into this. Even big names, let's just say one of my favorite shows that I listen to is the Rich Eisen Show. Phenomenal show. Shout out. I think it's a great show, but he was one of the guys banging the desk, like, let him play it both ways. I'm like, Rich, you are too smart to know that this is not going to end well if he plays both ways, for even a consistent time both ways. No player can do it. I don't think in the modern NFL. You can't do it. Players are faster. They hit harder. You're having less time in practices, so we're seeing more injuries overall. We probably have more turf fields than we did back in the 80s and the early 90s. There's too many different factors that can lead to an increase in injury, and the media is just like, they kept wanting to know. We want to see him play both ways, and that was the talk of the draft. I even remember on draft night, my Titans taking Cam Ward, and I didn't even see Cam Ward on the stage. I didn't see him and his, in his house with his family, because they're like, oh, Travis Hunter got picked next. Let's skip. I've never seen that in an NFL draft. In an NFL draft where they don't even showcase the first overall pick. They're just on to the next guy. The media hype was so behind him, and I think he was set up to fail from a media standpoint if he didn't have a great season. It had been a disappointment, and he has been a disappointment this year. Not all of it's his fault, but I think it's organization doesn't know what to do with him. I think he needs more refinement in his skills. He's undercooked, and it sounds negative, but it's frustrating for me because I want him to be great. I really do. Even though he's in a division rivalry, I see the potential there, but it makes me wonder if, and he hasn't done anything bad, but just saying, like, what's his ego look like? What's his mindset? The organization, hey, we talked about them struggling with BTJ. They're struggling with Travis Hunter. I'm like, okay, we have back-to-back first-round picks that are not performing to their expectation for various reasons. What's going on in Jacksonville? Do they not have the development? So it's a loaded question, and it's only time will tell. And I'm very curious to see how the story ends or continues for Travis Hunter and BTJ.
I'm with you on the Jags. I mean, there's a lot you can ding the Jags for organizationally as not being super competent or having great planning for their superstar players. Trevor Lawrence, you could throw into that category. I mean, he's been up and down. Who's to say that Trevor Lawrence wouldn't be a better version of himself if he went to another franchise? So I'm not trying to destroy the Jaguars or anything, but you would think that if you would trade up to get a guy like Travis Hunter, who's billed as a generational prospect, you would have more of a plan to implement him into your offense, into your defense. The last thing I'll say before we move on about Travis is, to me, there's a number one wide receiver, like a guy like Jamar Chase, finding a dude like that or a Justin Jefferson, that's like invaluable. Those guys are super duper 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 stars. You need those guys. However, I think it's harder to find a top tier cornerback in the draft, in the top of the draft especially, than it is to find a super duper star wide receiver like that. And so, to me, if you're billed as a top cornerback, that's probably where your energy needs to be focused if you're like the front office or you're the coaching staff and you're the player. Like Travis Hunter to me should have been a corner first and a wide receiver second. That's just my opinion. Never, coached a team. I don't know, but to me it's harder to find a guy that's a great cornerback than it is as a wide receiver. And so that's really where I hope they try to hone their efforts going forward. And the Jags are still competitive. They're beating the Colts right now. Like they're doing good as a team. But to excel and get back to that, Saxonville era, they need another Jalen Ramsey. And Travis Hunter is an athlete like Jalen Ramsey. So let's see it. Let's see it. That's all I'm trying to say. So who's up for your last bust, Logan? I know we have been running long here, but we have two more guys we're set to discuss.
Hey, we're still running strong. And
we're running strong.
You mentioned this man earlier in the cast, and that's a 27-year-old athletic physical phenom from Ole Miss. That's DK Metcalf. This dude, not just this season, I think he's been a disappointment to everybody, that's invested in football with his production. Because, coming out, and he still is, he's one of the most physically gifted monstrosities on the field. There is no reason why he should not be a top 5 wide receiver every year with his acumen. Going through this year so far, 45 receptions, 605 yards, 5 touchdowns. He's on a pace of 50.4 yards a game. He's currently 47th in receptions in the league. He's 32nd in receiving yards. He's tied for 19th in touchdowns. And he's 42nd in the league in yards a game. This is a wide receiver 1. Okay? And we could talk about the Steelers' offense and their system with Arthur Smith. But when you have a Hall of Fame quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, I had higher expectations this year. Especially, we talked about Davante Adams in his year with the Jets. And I'm like, he still put out a 1,000-yard receiver. And Garrett Wilson, I think, was also over 1,000 or pretty close to it. So I still thought, okay, Rodgers still has enough in the tank. DK might get paired up with, this is not a diss on Russell Wilson, but I'm like, this could be a new level, potentially, with Aaron Rodgers in a better situation. In terms of the passage, if we just kept the same numbers and he played exactly the same, he's on pace for 65 catches, 857 yards, and 7 touchdowns. This would be a career season low in yardage, the second worst reception since his rookie year, and it would be mid-level for his touchdowns. But overall, it would be a very, very disappointing year, especially for Steelers fans. In terms of the team, they're aggressively mid, and I think that reflects their record and the frustrations with the team. They're 15th in total offense, 25th in passing offense, 28th in rushing offense. So it's like, you guys really aren't great individually on the ball, but it's been a weird NFL year where some teams are great at the pass, but they can't run to save their lives. And the Steelers are just below average in both, in my opinion. Now, what does their defense look like? The highest paid defense in the NFL. Well, they're 18th in points allowed, 26th in passing yards allowed, 17th in rushing yards allowed. In terms of pop-off games this year, Week 4 against Minnesota, 5 catches, 126 yards, a touchdown. Week 6 against Cleveland, 4 catches, 95 yards, a touchdown. Week 8 against Green Bay, 5 catches, 55 yards, a touchdown. Not bad. Not bad pop-off games. Solid. Dud games. Week 7 against Cincinnati. One of the worst defenses in the NFL, if not the worst. 3 catches for 50 yards. That's disappointing. Week 9 against Indianapolis. 2 catches for 6 yards. What? That's it? Week 10 against the Chargers. 3 receptions, 35 yards. Week 13, most recent week, 3 receptions for 32 yards. Last season, which I wouldn't say is phenomenal either, 66 catches, 992 yards, 5 touchdowns, 39th in receptions, 25th in receiving touchdowns. I should say in receiving yards. I apologize. And he's tied for 50th in touchdowns. The Seahawks, his entire career, has been more pass happy, had a much better, efficient passing attack compared to what he's on with the Steelers this year. His best season was back in 2020. That was his sophomore campaign, I believe. 83 catches, over 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns. That was the breakout year where people were like, oh, wow, DK's going to be one of the guys. And we all thought that because of the physical specimen that he is, his speed, his height, his weight. But I think I already mentioned the offensive system change from a guy like Kubiak and previous offensive coordinators for Seattle to Arthur Smith. Arthur Smith is a notorious run-heavy man who has a infatuation with Jonnu Smith. Very odd. Look into it if you haven't. But I think a lot of it, because what's frustrating with me, and it's been brought up in interviews, other players have said it, even his current quarterback has kind of hinted around it, is that his work ethic has been questioned various times in his career. You know, he is not whatsoever a refined route runner, and his hands are not where they should be either. You know, a lot of our buddies make fun of DK Metcalf because he's got stone hands. I don't think they're that bad, but it's just when you're hearing questions about the offseason, the workouts that he does, and he's kind of getting, you know, on the shy end, being called out by previous quarterbacks, not just Aaron Rodgers. This is a guy that has relied on his physical abilities, and he has not worked on the fundamentals, the techniques, as much as you should for a guy that's been paid as much as he has. And if he put it all together, if he sat down, took the time, and he still has time, he's only 27, but if he put it all together, I don't see, there's not another wide receiver besides the only one that comes to mind in terms of physicality is A.J. Brown. The height, the build, the speed, you know, that they could. I remember watching A.J. Brown. It might have been against the Eagles when he was with the Titans. Like, he's running through 3 different guys, dragging 3 guys 8 yards to try to get in the end zone. That's the kind of receiver that A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf is. And, you know, it's just a disappointment for his career. I do think I'm curious to see what it looks like in the near future, because the Steelers are also a team that refuses to do a rebuild. Refuses. Ever since Big Ben retired, they have had this rotation of quarterbacks. They drafted, they attempted gentleman was taken by Cleveland. He was the backup quarterback for the Eagles. He took the knee last year. I'm having a brain
Kenny
fart.
Pickett?
Kenny Pickett. Kenny PP.
Kenny Smallhands.
Kenny Smallhands. They tried it with him. They tried the combination of Russell Wilson and, once again, forgetting the name. He's quarterback for the Jets this year. And he got Justin Fields. Okay.
I was also, I'm like, man, see, but really quick, I'll let you go. But that's how irrelevant this quarterback situation has been. Mm-hmm. Even an old, washed Aaron Rodgers is more relevant than what they had been doing post Big Ben. Kenny Pickett, clipboard guy. Russell Wilson, cooked. Justin Fields, bridge starter.
Yeah, and it's not even offensively, too, but even the defense, you know. T.J. Watt, phenomenal player. He's on the wrong end of 30. I don't understand how Cameron Hayward's still playing, but he is. Dude has been around forever. You know, they made the trade to bring in, they traded Mike Fitzpatrick for Jalen Ramsey, who is also on the other side of 30. This is a team that loves to go 9-8, finish barely above 500. And what's interesting is this past week, I'm sure you've seen this, there's been a lot more reports of Steelers fans fire Mike Tomlin. They want to change. And this is an organization that I think it helps and it hurts that they are foundationally strong and they don't do change quickly. They've only had, 3 head coaches in the entire franchise history, a blue blood franchise. They don't fire coaches. They really don't. They stick around for a long time. And it's getting to that point. And the more and more that the Steelers delay this more than they already have, the rougher the rebuild is going to be. I don't think a single Steelers fan, and this is not me trying to drag the Steelers, this is just a team that they're going to have to face the music eventually. And they got to do the rebuild at some point. They just keep pushing it off, and it's going to get worse. And you're eventually going to be in the hole with a ladder or rope that's too short, and then you're going to be on this rebuild for years and years. They got to do something. I don't know what it is. I don't know what they're going to do next year, because I'm assuming this is Aaron Rodgers' last year. I'm like, is this the year that they do it? Do they push it again another year? Because there's no way that you can think the past 3-4 years, all these different rotational pieces, that you thought you were going to win a Super Bowl. And the Steelers, they don't want to be bad. I get that. But they're obviously stuck, and they just have not made the changes to do anything about it. No large changes by any means. They're kind of on the quarterback carousel, kind of like the Colts were. The only problem is the Colts have always had this younger roster and guys going into their prime or they are into their prime or are in it, and the Steelers have guys out of their prime. They're on the wrong side of it. And it's going to bite them, and that's me kind of going off on a tangent, not as much focused on DK Metcalf, but this is just one of those, we're going to get rid of George Pickens because of how he acts up on our side of the field. I understand that. And then you bring in DK Metcalf. I believe you give him a contract extension if I believe it. And so it's like, all right, now we have possibly a downgrade at that position. And we don't know who the quarterback is going to be next year. I don't know, man. The Steelers are frustrating because I don't hate them. They're not a franchise that I despise. It's just I question this slow torture that the Steelers fans have been on. I think they agree with that. I don't think there's any fight with what I'm saying. I think it's, at this point, it's just frustration, and they're ready for a change.
Unlike you, I dislike the Steelers. I don't mind them being in purgatory. They have 6 Super Bowl wins, and I don't need them to get any more. And I have no shade against Steelers fans. Steelers fans are overall pretty nice and respectful. I know maybe some other people have some different opinions on Steelers fans. I'm not a Bengals fan. I'm not going to get all up in arms about it. I just don't like it was similar to the Patriots stuff. Growing up, the Steelers were always really good. They kind of felt like an inevitable team when your squad would go up against them. And I hold a grudge. I do hold a grudge, just like the Pats. So I'm going to zag on the Steelers here, but I do agree that it's time to move on from Mike Tomlin. It's time to take the horse out to pasture. Send it to the glue factory. It's over. It needs to be changed because the Steelers are quickly losing relevance in the national conversation. It's the same thing year in and year out, and it's kind of like they're scared to lose the floor, but they have no ceiling. So removing Mike Tomlin might, it could plunge your franchise into a situation that they have not experienced in a long time if they don't make the right hire. But even more arguable is what they're doing now is not working. It is not producing playoff wins. The last time they were actually good was with Ben Roethlisberger. They haven't shown the ability to figure out their offense, and their defense is aging alongside their very mediocre offense. All of that is combined to be a really, really bad situation, but one where they would need to be in a position to make a decision, the ownership. So if there's any light for the Steelers, it is they have to make a decision, essentially. And if I was a fan and they didn't either ask Mike Tomlin to resign or move on, even if they won the division, say they win the division and they make the first round of the playoffs and they get beat, I think that still needs to be the conversation around the Steelers. Hey, let's move on. Let's do something else. Let's figure it out. Now, tying it back to DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf is a microcosm of the entire situation the Steelers find themselves in right now. It's how can we find a guy to be our number one wide receiver on offense and plug him into this very mundane, mediocre system so we can be competitive and potentially make the playoffs or at least get to 8 or 9 wins. He's not moving the needle in the way another guy would. And in fairness to George Pickens, who we talked about earlier, he's a needle mover. He is a needle mover for the Dallas Cowboys. Now, he was not a needle mover for Pittsburgh, but in Dallas, he has proven to elevate their offense. The Cowboys are, I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs. I don't think they're a bad team like we were talking about. They definitely have pieces. And I'll say this, they are certainly more fun to watch than the Pittsburgh Steelers. You could not force me to watch Steelers football if you tried. If Steelers are on, I know what it's going to be. It's run, run, run with these running backs you barely know. They had Najee Harris gotten like 3.5 yards a carry, run it into the line. Just nothing very exciting with that team. So DK Metcalf, he's had a decent career, but I want to talk about like the myth of DK Metcalf. And maybe that's like a little harsh, so I'll pull it back from that word essentially. But I feel like I was kind of talking about this earlier. The image we have of DK Metcalf as a top-tier wide receiver in the NFL is more coming from the images we've seen of him on social media, the short clips, the bursts of him doing something athletically phenomenal. Do you remember the Sean Oakman meme? The guy that played for Baylor, and he was on the Jumbotron, and the meme went viral, and he just looked absolutely jacked out of his mind. He's like six-pack. He had the crop top. Sean Oakman never did anything. He just looked like a freak athlete. DK Metcalf is a freak athlete. Obviously, he's done stuff in the NFL. I don't want to say he's a good player, but he's not a great player. He's like the 14th best wide receiver. You know what I mean? Like, is that who you want to make your number one? I don't know. Is that who you want to devote a bunch of money to? And the other thing is, you were talking about his motivation and his work ethic and his offseason workouts and stuff. There's some things he said over the years that would have led us to believe that this could have been a possibility, like where we're at right now. The other day, he said that he would be a fat ass, essentially, if he did not play football. He loves to eat. But I've seen stuff of him in the past to where he only eats candy. Like, he is addicted to candy. He eats bags of candy every day. Now, that's fun and hilarious. I wouldn't advise people at home to eat candy every day like DK Metcalf does, because he's a pro athlete. He works it off. His body is like freaking crazy. So, pause. But anyway, his athleticism, the reputation of his athleticism don't quite match up to the production. And I think his reputation has kind of outran his actual impact as a football player, because DK Metcalf, what's he really done? What's he really done? What's he really won? I'm not saying the wide receiver is going to change everything for a football team. It's a team game, but we're sitting here in how long has he been playing? 6 or 7 or whatever. Don't quote me on that. But we're significantly into his career here, and we're just kind of seeing empty production, empty calories. And that's unfortunate for him, because he's one of the most freak athletic specimens that's ever come in at the wide receiver position. And to round it out on DK, you brought up this guy earlier, and yeah, he's had a little bit of a tumultuous career. He forced his way out of Tennessee. He, his running mate at Ole Miss, A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown has won something. He's committed to winning. Not saying DK's not committed to winning, but he's been in a winning situation. He's had meaningful production in the playoffs, and DK opposite him has not. And they're both freak wide receivers, and like you were saying, they're probably the most comparable guys to each other, like physical-wise, play style-wise, etc. And it's so funny, they played opposite each other at Ole Miss, and one guy's career has resulted in a Super Bowl ring and a lot of praise, even though he's kind of been a diva. And the other guy has also been like low-key a diva, but he hasn't really won anything. And all we have to remember his production by is that like social media clip of him running the dude down after an interception. So the Steelers, DK, it's time to part ways. It's time to move on. I think he could use a change of scenery, and I think the Steelers could use an organizational revamp.
Yeah, a lot of changes coming. I don't know how much. I don't know exactly who, but the Steelers, we're going to see some changes this offseason. I really do feel that. Now, that is the end of my list. And last but not least, you have one more. I'm excited for this next one.
So this guy's really interesting because he's not in the vein of some of the more established characters that we've talked about earlier. And I don't even mean like a guy like Brian Thomas in that, he was a first-round pick when he was coming into the NFL. He had a pedigree. This guy was more of a sleeper pick in fantasy leagues this year. He was more of an under-the-radar guy, but he became, around draft time, kind of a sexy pick to get in the late rounds to bolster your running back core. And that is Washington Commanders running back Jacory Croskey-Merrit, JCM. I'm just going to call him by his nickname, Bill. So Bill was tabbed as a guy who could potentially get a lot of carries in Washington, has a little bit of a receiving pedigree also. Washington didn't really – they had Austin Eckler as their starting quarterback. He went down early in the year with an injury. Washington fans and fantasy owners of Bill are thinking, oh my gosh, like the seas have parted. Let's walk through it. Like this is going to be huge. He's finally got the opportunity to do what I drafted him to do. And instead, besides like a few moments here or there, he's really been disappointing. Now, he is a rookie, so this is just, it is what it is. Like, I don't, he wasn't going to come in and be Derrick Henry or anything, but the reason he's disappointing is because he had the opportunity to fulfill the role in which fantasy owners assigned him coming into draft season. He had that opportunity, and it didn't quite work out. Now, obviously, Washington, Jane Daniels got hurt. They're pretty old. They've been banged up. It's just not the same season that people projected them to have. But JCM, in terms of, fantasy, has just kind of been, he's just kind of been disappointing. He's had one 100-yard game. He had an 82-yard game against the Giants to kick off the season. He had a touchdown that game. And then, recently, though, we have, four rushing attempts, like 0 touchdowns, 20 yards. Before the bye week, which was week 12 against Miami, a bad defense, 28 yards, just 30 yards, 38 yards. And then on the receiving end, nothing, essentially. One catch here and there every couple weeks, like he gets a reception. So it hasn't been great for JCM. And because of his draft status in the actual NFL, not the fantasy leagues, he was a 7th-round pick, I believe. And due to the lack of production, unfortunately, because he was tabbed as a fantasy guy, I think this could be – people are kind of looking at him now. It's like, is this guy on the fringe of the league? He was excited. He had the memes behind him. Bill. It just didn't really quite work out. And I don't really have too much else on him. Obviously, the season for Washington has been an overall disappointment. But it's very rare to kind of close this out that he had, I want to emphasize again, he had the opportunity to do what people drafted him in fantasy to do. You get him as a handcuff or you take him as a sleeper, and then he's thrust into a position through injury to where he's going to get volume, and he didn't really do anything with it. And it's only gotten worse as the season goes on.
I think he has been one of the biggest disappointments who has been given a lofty goals that he should have never gotten. And that's not his fault either, because like you said, the situation is, Austin Eckler goes down, and Bill had some moments in the preseason during that. So everybody hopped on the train. Like you said, the memes. The Washington Commanders are sending out posts on X with Bill as like the head cover of these tweets. And you're right, he has had the opportunities, but they've just been perfectly fine with running a committee between Chris Rodriguez Jr., Jeremy McNichols, and Bill. And there is a reason 99, 98% of the time that seventh rounders are seventh rounders. He's talented. He played at the collegiate level. I'm not saying he couldn't have made this huge leap or been the guy. But this guy got passed up by 32 teams 7 times. Except for, on the 7th attempt, the Commanders took him. So he has holes in his game. He was not a perfect running back coming out. And I remember when the fantasy season initially got started, before the Eckler injury and before some of the preseason hype, and I know this is fantasy, I apologize, but the amount of hype around this guy that he was getting drafted near the end of the draft, let's say round 12, 13, it's a handcuff. Maybe. Austin Eckler goes down, and in one of my leagues, he got drafted as high as like round 5. Absolute insanity. Like, this is the Labor Day weekend, the weekend before the first Thursday night football game. The amount of hype behind this guy was absolutely insane. I can't recall another player getting this much hype besides maybe one name that jumps to my mind is Victor Cruz. But Victor Cruz actually capitalized on it, because nobody knew who Victor Cruz was coming in. And then all of a sudden, preseason against the Jets, I remember he had 3 touchdowns. He's doing a salsa dance. And he became kind of like is this going to be the next phenom? And he was. And Bill I wouldn't say he had all the opportunities, but he had enough to make a statement and take a lead in this backfield. And he just couldn't convert it. Couldn't do it. Do I think that's the end of Bill? No. There's a reason, a lot of players, especially skill players, not as, quarterbacks are kind of a weird situation, but typically we see a decent jump from solid players from their freshman campaign, their sophomore year in the NFL. And maybe we'll see that from Bill coming in next year. So I'm not going to write him off and say, oh, he's buried in there. I'm like, it's not like Chris Rodriguez or McNichols has shown anything for me to be like, oh, wow, they're the guy. And who knows what Austin Eckler looks like coming back next year. I have no idea. Wrong side of 30, multiple injuries at this point in his career. Who knows what he's going to return to. So I'm not going to close the chapter. I'm not going to close the book on Bill just yet. I think we just have to be a little bit more aware about the situation for a player and how much hype there is. I remember earlier on in the year, there were like a lot of people on X, on Twitter, were saying, he's an industry plant. And I thought that was hilarious. And I'm like, you guys are buying into the hype. I was never super high on him because I didn't know much about him. 7th round pick. I'm like, yeah, he's got the opportunity. But I'm not spending a 5th round pick, a 6th round pick on this guy. I'll let somebody else do that. I'll pick somebody else that I know has done it in the league before. But we'll see. Book's not closed. I'm excited to see what he does next year.
This guy bought the hype, and it had not worked out for him because the only good game he had, he was on my bench. So just the mismanagement aspect on my end. But yes, I thought I got a steal in JCM, and I didn't draft him anything like the 5th or 6th round. And we had taken him or I had taken him like Eckler hadn't got hurt or, whatever. He was more of a sleeper to me. And he was a guy who it was going to be on my bench. And it became very clear that he was going to have some opportunity at accumulating volume, and it just never quite worked out. But yeah, I also, if you could tell by this list, I took 2 guys who I've been personally scorned by this year in fantasy. in our league specifically. All right, so the last thing we wanted to talk about here is just kind of our league in general. We've been running this league for over a decade plus. Decker is the commissioner, and the both of us are on opposite ends of the spectrum. My team is flaming out and crashing out and burning really hardcore. Decker is in the mix as usual. So, yeah, like give me your thoughts on your team this year and how everything's turned out.
So, my philosophy coming into the draft is I try to do a little bit of the opposite of what everybody else does. If I think it's going to be a wide receiver heavy year, I try to go running back, or vice versa. And a lot of it is just taking the best value you can coming back. In terms of the team comp, I did go a little bit heavier running back this year. I had Bijan Robinson, Bucky Irving. I picked up Rico Dowdle, luckily, in the middle of the year before he exploded, right when Chuba went down. I have been carried by Josh Allen. I've also been stabbed in the back by Josh Allen, depending on the week. My wide receiver core has been very weak this year. I've gotten lucky. One of my later draft picks was Ibuka, just because I was reading all the reports on Godwin, and I did not think he was good to go, and I've been right so far. He's back in the lineup now, but he's definitely helped me out. But I've been rotating wide receivers this year. Jerry Jeudy, Troy Franklin, Darnell Mooney, John Mechie. It's just been a rotating door for that second wide receiver spot, and that's my weakness. I should preface this and say this is a 12-man league. If you've never done a 12-man or anything higher than that, the bottom of the barrel is really bad. And that's where I'm at wide receiver position. Now, Trey McBride, I'm usually in the camp of just wait on a tight end. Find a guy, fill it in. And there's been plenty of guys out there, like Hunter Henry, you got him late. You could have had, Tucker Kraft, he got hurt. But, Ferguson, all those guys. And I think I took McBride maybe in the fourth round. He just fell, and I'm like, you know what? I think he's a good position value. I like where he's at. I wanted him last year, didn't get him. And honestly, McBride has been the hands down number one tight end. That's been helpful. Bijan is a monster, of course. Rico has stepped in when Bucky's been hurt. Jordan Mason stepped in when Aaron Jones was hurt, and he had some serviceable games. So as of right now, I'm the second seed. And in the last week, if one of our teammates beats the number one seed, who's Kenton's brother, he drops down, I would take first if I won because of points scored. Now, there's another guy tied with me who's third. If I were to lose, Grant were to lose, he would take the first spot. So there's a lot of intrigue. The playoffs are already set for us. And I believe, Kenton, you might finish last, depending on how this week finishes out. You are tied for last, technically. So if you were to win and Sam were to lose, you would avoid our punishments, which I think a lot of people would love to hear about. So what we do in punishments,
I will be doing nothing degrading at all. And I don't mean like degrading in the sense of if I lose, which it's looking like I will, I won't do anything like where I got to get in like a freaking dog cage, or I got to go on a college campus as like a protest. Like, I'm not doing anything like that. Like, it just won't happen. But I will do like the Waffle House thing. I could do a Milk Mile. I would do the White Castle thing. Like, I'm open to doing hot wings. Like, I'll do all of that stuff, but I'm not going to do anything that's going to be content or just like I'm not getting in a dog cage. I'm a 28-year-old man. Like, it's just not going to happen. Like, that's just some demented psycho stuff. And to encapsulate my season a little bit, you guys have kind of gotten a taste of, yes, I had Brian Thomas Jr., I had a JCM, I talked about how I had Trevor Lawrence and Jaden Daniels and Ashton Genty. I really don't even have to get too far into it after that. I had Colston Loveland. He didn't really start picking it up until later in the season after I'd already dropped him. So these are just kind of some of the players that encapsulated my season. I've never been in this position before. I've been near the bottom at one year, but historically I've always been pretty decent. I would say I'm usually a high floor team. This year, the floor was old and it fell apart and it broke down and I fell through it. So I'll say this. If I lose, which I probably will, we can make some content out of, whatever punishment it is, as long as it's not dehumanizing in the Geneva Convention, against the Geneva Convention.
So I do want to preface this. So before the year, I will submit a list of 5 punishments, and you get to choose from the 5. Or if you disagree with any of the 5, you can propose your own punishment as long as the rest of the league approves it. So I'm trying to find the text, the picture of the punishments. I can't do it, so I'm going to go off the top of my head. So one of the punishments was you have to get the Joe Burrow Slim Shady haircut, dye it blonde, and have it for a month. Not terrible, but not great. One of the other options was you have to take an adult doll to a public restaurant and go on a date with it. I got a feeling nobody's picking that one. I just threw it out there. Another one was you have to create a adult content account. You don't have to post anything. So OF, but when you make the link, you have to leave it up for a month, and the rest of the guys in the league are going to share it. So people are going to think that you are getting some extra money on the side. One of them was the Hot Wings Challenge, which for me would be the last one I do because I can't tolerate heat at all. I'd be crying. I'd probably be throwing up. It just would not be a fun time. I'd be like, I'll take the public humiliation. I'll shave my head and bleach it blonde. I think that one's more realistic for me. And I can't think of the last one that I proposed. I can't think of it, but I'll let you take that.
I don't think 3 of those are doable because of my career, to be completely honest. To me, I don't remember what the last one was either, but the Hot Wings one, I would do that. I mean, it would suck. I like hot food, but as I've gotten older, hot food is kind of just messes me up. Just to be fair, I would rather be on the toilet all day than publicly humiliate myself. I guess, and yeah, I don't know. I can't swing it with my career. I can't be going to interviews with public officials with Eminem haircut or sharing OnlyFans. If it, I don't know. I'm not saying I'm so important or anything. I just don't think I could swing that.
And I fully realize that some of these are preposterous.
They're better
I put it out there for fun.
They're better than the ones that are the dog cage. I'll tell you that much.
So we keep mentioning the dog cage because we had a guy in our league who's been in it for, I want to say, maybe 4 or 5 years now. And ever since we introduced the punishments, he's been incessant on the dog cage. And nobody else in the league, they're like, no. And what the dog cage is, they basically put you in a cage, and you basically get different condiments, fluids, whatever, and you're just dumping it on this poor soul who's stuck in the cage. And it's funny because the guy that kept proposing that, he finished last this past season. And we're like, oh, we got to do the cage. He's like, no, I'm not doing the cage. He was adamant. He's like, I'm not doing it. And he did the milk mile.
Shout out to him. That was
shout
Big
out
Boy
to
Pants,
him.
for sure.
We had talked about doing punishments years before that, but nobody really followed through. He's the first one, so we've established the foundation for it. But I did feel sorry for that man because he did the mile, and he drank some of it before, but he's drinking most of it after. And we're sitting and prepping for the draft. We're waiting for the last person to potentially get there. And this dude is yakking 3 times in 5 minutes. And I'm like, dude, you don't have to finish the gallon. This is... It was bad. I was like, dude, you're fine. You did it. You drank half a gallon. You ran a mile. I don't want to hear you yak anymore. But we take this league... this is one of my more serious leagues. It's not necessarily the biggest payout, but because we've all known each other, most of us went to high school together. We played sports together. And it's a way for all of us to get together in one spot out of the year, which is fairly rare, especially now that we've gotten older. I'm living multiple states away from the Cincinnati area and just work and life and kids, and I get it. But fantasy football it's a great way to get into football, to be invested, pay attention to individual players, see what's going on, gives you another reason to watch it. But I think my favorite part is the August, September, getting the guys together and just turning into a big party.
I totally agree. And to round it out, I'll say two things. One, on the fantasy football front, I think a lot of people's girlfriends, and I'm not saying this about my girlfriend, just like in general, I think they don't quite understand why do all these guys play fantasy football? Like, what's the deal? Like, why is this so serious? Why are they so invested? And it's like, this is one of the easiest ways you can, as a guy, maintain connections with your friends. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's throwing in some money. Everybody probably watches football. And even if they're like, there's plenty of people who play fantasy football that don't even like or watch football just to kind of hang out and be part of it. And that's why so many friends do it, essentially. And it's not even just fantasy football. Some do fantasy basketball, or some do fantasy baseball, or whatever. But in our culture, fantasy football is one of the most omnipresent ones. So that's why we do it. It's an excuse to get together and hang out and have fun. And football coming around is like a holiday. And the second thing I'll say regarding the punishment is I have a little more of a benevolent one. It's like, I will throw a kegger. I will buy a keg. I'll do all that. We can have a party. Now, maybe that's just me getting wanting to don't fucking embarrass me or whatever. But we could also do that. We'll see what people want. But I am totally, the other three, absolutely not. But I will definitely do the hot wings one. I will nuke my health and my stomach for hot wings if that's what it takes. And I'm actually competitively, I would be. I know it's not. I would be in pain. This would be bad. My lips get chapped really easy. This is not. I think this is a way that that's one I would be yes. I'm not going to skip out on doing it. I'm not going to bail. I would commit to doing that essentially if that's what everybody wanted.
I don't have any doubt that you would try to skip out on it. I also think the benevolent route would probably work for the entire league. It's a free keg? Yeah, that's the kind of guys we're in the league with, and I love them, and I'm not against it. I don't vote on anything. I'm the commissioner. I just propose stuff. I'm not allowed to vote on anything. In terms of the topics and subject material, I think we covered everything we wanted to today, and I want to appreciate, say shout out to everybody that's watching, that, getting to see us kind of really take off. And, we're just doing this for fun, and we'll see where it goes. But we would greatly appreciate, a like, a follow, a spread. Just tell your friends and family, and we'll love any feedback that you can give, because we want to make this the best experience we can for our viewers and people who take time out of their day to listen to our content.
Totally. Go ahead. I'm going to echo what Logan said. Like, subscribe. And I think the biggest key is consistency. So if we can keep putting out the pod and keep curating interesting topics, and not just football. I know we've been pretty football focused here, but we're in the throes of football season. But Logan and I, we're diverse guys. We could talk about a lot of different stuff. So anyway, I think we're going to wrap it up there. We've been recording for 3 hours and 17 minutes. This has been a JRE episode, essentially. So with that, go ahead, like, subscribe, hit the follow, tell your friends, and we'll see you all next week.
Have a great week, everybody.